The sound of a shovel striking earth can break a silence centuries old. Ancient burial sites are not just graves, they are time capsules sealed by time and waiting to tell their stories. Today, we are opening 50 of them. You will witness 50 astonishing discoveries that have rewritten history, challenged everything we thought we knew, and sent genuine shivers down the spines of those who found them. We will see a tomb flooded with rivers of poisonous mercury and meet a screaming mummy locked in a final, silent agony. What do these silent guardians of the past want to tell us about life, death, and the nature of power? By the end, you will have a front row seat to the greatest detective story ever written, one where the clues are made of gold, bone, and whispers from the underworld. What do you think we might have buried with our own fears and hopes? The year was 1922, in the stifling heat of Egypt's Valley of the Kings. After years of fruitless digging, archaeologist Howard Carter peered through a small hole into a darkness untouched for over 3,000 years. His patron, Lord Carnarvon, waited anxiously behind him. "What is there? Can you see anything?" Carter's reply would echo through history. Yes, wonderful things. He was looking into the antechamber of the tomb of a young pharaoh named Tutankhamun. And it was not just wonderful, it was perfectly, miraculously intact. Every other royal tomb in the valley had been stripped clean by ancient robbers, but this one, hidden beneath the debris of later tombs, had slept undisturbed. The air inside was still and ancient, heavy with the dust of millennia. What Carter and his team saw next defied belief. The room was not a neat museum display. It was a chaotic jumble of a pharaoh's afterlife, packed floor to ceiling. A golden chariot lay disassembled. Priceless alabaster vases stood next to elegant furniture. There were statues of gods, intricate jewelry boxes, and even a fan made from ostrich feathers, still remarkably preserved. This was not just a tomb, it was a teenager's packing list for eternity. But the true astonishment lay deeper within. After carefully cataloguing the antechamber, they reached the burial chamber itself. There, encased within a series of 4 magnificent shrines, was a single stone sarcophagus. Inside it rested 3 coffins, one nested within the other. The innermost coffin was not merely gold-plated. It was crafted from solid gold, over 200 pounds of it, hammered and sculpted into the likeness of the boy king. And upon the mummy's head was the object that would become the very face of ancient Egypt, the golden death mask. Made of 22 pounds of solid gold and inlaid with lapis lazuli, carnelian, and quartz, it is a portrait of serene, eternal youth. This discovery did more than fill museum cases. It revolutionized archaeology. For the first time, the world saw not just fragments, but the complete, overwhelming splendor of a pharaoh's funeral. We learned what they truly believed they needed, from golden thrones to simple board games to keep them entertained in the next world. Tutankhamun, a minor king who ruled for only about 9 years, became an immortal global icon because his treasures survived. It makes you wonder what unimaginable riches were once housed in the plundered tombs of greater pharaohs like Ramses II. Their glory is lost to thieves, but Tut's humble, hidden vault gave us a whisper of their true scale. Yet the gold was not the only thing that escaped Tutankhamun's tomb. A darker legend slithered out with it, one we now call the Curse of the Pharaoh. It began with the untimely death of Lord Carnarvon, the expedition's financial backer. Just months after the tomb's opening, he died in Cairo from an infected mosquito bite, which led to pneumonia and blood poisoning. At the exact moment of his death, back in England, his favorite dog reportedly let out a howl and dropped dead. Then the lights famously went out across Cairo. Newspapers, hungry for a sensational story, pounced. They declared a supernatural vengeance had been unleashed. The legend grew as others connected to the discovery died in the following years. Howard Carter's personal secretary died from a suspicious blood poisoning. A radiologist who X-rayed the mummy died of a mysterious illness. An American financier who visited the tomb was found dead in his hotel room. The list seemed to grow, each death another brick in the wall of a terrifying myth. But let us separate the drama from the data. Howard Carter, the man who first breached the tomb and handled the mummy, lived for another 16 years, dying of natural causes at age 64. Most of the core excavation team lived long, ordinary lives. So what explains the so-called curse? Science offers more grounded, yet still fascinating answers. Sealed tombs can cultivate dangerous environments. Ancient, dormant bacteria or fungal spores like Aspergillus could have been stirred up and inhaled, causing fatal infections in individuals with weakened immune systems, like the already ailing Lord Carnarvon. There is also the potent psychological power of suggestion. If you believe you are cursed, that stress can have very real physical consequences. But the true power of the curse was not biological, it was narrative. It tapped into a deep, primal fear of disturbing the dead and a Western fascination with a mysterious, ancient East. The curse created a perfect storm of mystery that forever linked archaeology with danger and the supernatural in the public mind. It transformed dry excavation reports into front-page ghost stories, ensuring that Tutankhamun's legacy would be one of wonder wrapped in a shroud of chilling intrigue. This phenomenon makes you question, where does respectful exploration end and a dangerous trespass begin? Are some doors once opened never meant to be closed? While one boy king slept with his golden treasures, another ruler prepared for the afterlife on a scale that defies human imagination. In March of 1974, a group of farmers digging a well outside the city of Xi'an, China, struck something hard beneath the dry earth. It was not a rock, but the head and shoulder of a life-sized clay soldier. That single, accidental discovery would crack open the greatest archaeological find of the 20th century. What those farmers had found was the outer perimeter of an underground necropolis so vast, it is still being excavated today. This was the eternal god for Qin Shi Huang, the man who first unified China and declared himself its emperor. Fearing death and obsessed with immortality, he commissioned a terracotta army to protect him for eternity. The scale is almost impossible to grasp. 3 massive pits contain over 8,000 soldiers, each one unique. There are infantrymen standing at rigid attention, archers kneeling with their hands positioned to hold long-vanished bows, cavalrymen alongside their sturdy horses, and officers commanding chariots. They are not lined up like toy soldiers. They are arranged in precise, battle-ready formations, a complete military hierarchy frozen in clay. But the true magic is in the details. Look closely at their faces. No two are exactly alike. Each soldier possesses distinct features, different hairstyles, unique expressions of determination, resolve, or youthful anxiety. Some have delicate, scholarly faces, others bear the rugged, weathered look of veterans. This was not a production line of identical dolls. Teams of artisans working from live models created portraits in clay. They were then painted in vivid pigments of pink, red, green, and blue, colors that have sadly faded upon exposure to air. The craftsmanship was staggeringly advanced. The hollow bodies were built from coiled clay, the solid legs acting as a pedestal. Arms, heads, and hands were crafted separately and attached. Even the armor plates on their chests are rendered with meticulous, realistic detail, down to the rivets and leather ties. This was not merely a monument, it was a functional spiritual defense system. Qin Shi Huang believed his earthly power would need to be enforced in the next world, and he would need a real army to do it. He did not want symbolic figurines. He demanded a true military force, forever loyal, forever vigilant. The terracotta army gives us a breathtaking census of an ancient military, from the lowest foot soldier to the highest general, preserved for over 2,000 years. It forces us to ask, what kind of mind conceives of such a project? What profound fear of the unknown could drive a man to bury an entire army, not of ghosts but of perfect, silent clones, all waiting for a war in a realm no living person has ever seen. But for all its staggering scale, the terracotta army was merely the outer garrison. The emperor's own tomb lies under a massive, vegetation-covered mound about 1 mile away, and it has never been opened. Ancient historians, writing a century after the emperor's death, described a subterranean palace of unimaginable splendor. They wrote of ceilings inlaid with pearls to mimic the night sky, of crossbows set to automatically fire at intruders, and most hauntingly, of vast maps of the empire rendered with rivers and seas of flowing, toxic mercury. For centuries, these accounts were dismissed as fantastical legend. Then, modern science intervened. Geochemical surveys of the tomb mound have repeatedly detected unusually high concentrations of mercury in the soil, levels far above the natural background. This startling evidence suggests the ancient chroniclers were not merely inventing tales. There may indeed be a massive quantity of liquid mercury sealed within that burial chamber, used to create those shimmering, deadly rivers meant to symbolize the lifeblood of the land the emperor ruled. This presents a profound and dangerous dilemma. The ethical and technical challenges of excavating the central tomb are immense. How do you safely breach a structure that may be riddled with ancient mechanical traps, a concept that suddenly seems less mythical? More critically, how do you handle a potential atmosphere saturated with mercury vapor, a neurotoxin that could be lethal to excavators and could irrevocably contaminate any organic artifacts inside, like silks, wooden items, or the emperor's own remains? The potential wonders within are the stuff of dreams. We could find the emperor's sarcophagus, his personal effects, and a complete, untouched map of his world in precious materials. Yet the price of curiosity could be catastrophic damage, so the mound remains sealed, a silent hill holding its breath. It is the ultimate archaeological paradox. The greatest discovery of all is sitting right there, but we may never be able to look at it. This forces a humbling question. Is some knowledge too dangerous to uncover? Are there some doors once opened that could unleash a poison not just of the body, but upon history itself? High on the frozen shoulders of Mount Ampoto in Peru, a volcano began to stir in 1991. Its eruption melted ancient glaciers that had clung to the peak for centuries, and as the ice retreated, it began to give up its secrets. 4 years later, anthropologist Johann Reinhard and his climbing partner Miguel Zarat were surveying the summit ridge when they spotted a strange, colorful bundle partially exposed on the icy slope. As they carefully brushed away the frost, they realized they were looking at a small human figure, seated and perfectly preserved. This was the Ice Maiden, a young Inca girl who had been offered to the gods over 500 years ago. The freezing, dry, and thin air of the 20,000-foot altitude had acted as a perfect natural freezer, mummifying her body, her clothing, and every artifact with her in astonishing detail. She was not a skeleton but a person. Her skin was leathery, her long black hair was neatly braided, and she sat cross-legged, as if in a deep, eternal sleep, her head slightly bowed. She was dressed in a magnificent, finely woven tunic and a vicuña wool shawl, secured with a silver clasp. Beside her were small, exquisite figurines crafted from gold, silver, and spondylus shell, likely meant to be her attendants in the afterlife. There were also bowls of food, including maize and dried meat, and a pouch containing coca leaves. This was not a hasty burial. It was a deliberate, sacred ceremony known as capacocha. The Inca believed that mountains were living deities or apus that controlled weather, water, and the fertility of the land. To appease these powerful gods and ensure balance in the empire, to stop droughts, earthquakes, or volcanic fury, they would make the ultimate offering, the lives of their most perfect children. The girl on Ampoto, estimated to be between 12 and 15 years old, was likely chosen for her beauty and purity. Analysis of her hair revealed a shift in diet in her final year, indicating she was fed elite foods like maize and animal protein, a sign she was being prepared and honored for her role. Her death was likely a ritualistic one, possibly from exposure or a blow to the head after being given chicha, a fermented corn beer, to sedate her. She was then seated in this sacred posture, bundled with her precious gifts and left alone with the sky. This discovery offers a heartbreakingly intimate window into Inca cosmology. It shows a belief system where the boundary between the human and divine was negotiated through profound sacrifice. The Ice Maiden was not murdered. In the eyes of her people, she was transformed, becoming a permanent ambassador to the mountain gods, a mediator ensuring the sun would rise, the rains would fall, and the empire would endure. Her frozen preservation allows us to see not just an artifact, but a child, making this ancient practice feel immediate and deeply human. It forces us to confront a difficult truth about the past, where spiritual logic could justify acts that today seem unthinkable. What does it mean to be chosen for such a destiny, to be elevated to a divine messenger while your family watches you walk into the clouds, never to return? The silent, frozen peaks of the Andes hold one kind of sacrifice, but the sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia reveal another, far more communal and orchestrated. Decades before the Inca Maiden was found, another dig was rewriting our understanding of early civilization's grandeur and its grim costs. In the 1920s, archaeologist Leonard Woolley began excavating a vast cemetery in the ancient city of located in what is now Iraq. The city was already legendary as the possible birthplace of the biblical Abraham, but what Woolley unearthed was not a story from scripture, but a tangible, dazzling, and deeply unsettling page from humanity's first chapters. His work in the Royal Cemetery of dating back over 4,500 years to the early dynastic period, revealed treasures that still take the breath away. One of the most exquisite is an object now known as the ram in a thicket. It is not an actual ram, but a masterwork of sculpture. The figure of a goat standing on its hind legs to nibble at a golden tree is crafted from wood covered in gold foil with a lush fleece of carved shell and lapis lazuli. Its eyes are made of shell and lapis, giving it a startling, lifelike gaze. This was not merely decoration, it was a religious offering, a symbol of fertility and vitality meant to accompany its owner into the afterlife. That owner was likely a royal figure, and Woolley found evidence of their status in a grave he identified as belonging to a queen named Puabi. Her remains were adorned with a headdress of almost overwhelming opulence. It was a complex wig-like arrangement of gold ribbons, beaded strands of lapis lazuli and carnelian, and enormous golden rings, all culminating in tall, comb-like flowers. To see it reconstructed is to see the very definition of ancient power and wealth made wearable. But the true shock of was not the gold, it was the people. Alongside these royal tombs, Woolley discovered what he grimly named the Great Death Pit. This was not a tomb built for one. It was a large, rectangular shaft, and at its bottom lay the carefully arranged bodies of 74 individuals. 6 were soldiers or guards, clad in copper helmets and carrying weapons. The others were court attendants, overwhelmingly women, dressed in their finest red robes and elaborate golden headdresses similar to Puabi's. They were not thrown in haphazardly, they were laid in neat rows as if they had lain down to sleep. Analysis showed no signs of violent trauma, no broken bones or cut marks. So how did they die? The prevailing, haunting theory is that they willingly took their own lives in a profound ritual of allegiance. The scene Woolley pieced together is both ceremonial and chilling. It is believed that after the royal body was placed in the burial chamber, these retainers, the servants, musicians, and soldiers of the court, walked down into the pit. They drank a poisonous or sedative potion, perhaps from a shared cup found at the scene, and then arranged themselves peacefully beside their ruler. They chose to follow their master not out of fear, but out of duty, belief, and a conviction that their roles would continue in the next world. This was not a mass murder, but a collective passage. the Great Death Pit forces us to grapple with a social contract utterly alien to us today. In Sumerian belief, a ruler's divine authority did not end at death. Their need for a court, for protection, for music, and for service continued eternally. To be chosen for this ritual was likely considered a high honor, a guarantee of a privileged position in the afterlife. It shows a culture where community and loyalty were so deeply woven into the fabric of the cosmos that they extended beyond the grave. This discovery leaves us with a disturbing, silent tableau. What kind of faith makes such a final act not one of terror but of solemn purpose? What echoes of songs and whispered prayers lingered in that pit before the earth was finally shoveled back over, sealing them together for millennia? The communal grave at reveals a belief in an afterlife that mirrored the world of the living, complete with servants and soldiers. But in the cold fjords of Norway, the Vikings envisioned a different passage, one that required a specific and magnificent vessel. In the year 1904, a farmer on the Osberg farm near the Oslo fjord uncovered something massive and wooden while digging in a mound. Archaeologists soon realized he had found not just a boat but an entire Viking ship buried for over 1,000 years. The Osberg ship was a stunning sight, a slender, elegant longship carved entirely from oak with a towering, spiraled prow that looked like a sea serpent rising from the earth. It was not alone in its grave. Inside a timber burial chamber amidships were the skeletons of 2 women. One was elderly, around 80 years old, and suffered from severe arthritis. The other was younger, perhaps in her 50s. Their identities are a mystery, but the richness of their grave goods suggests immense status, possibly a queen and her attendant or a high priestess. The ship was not filled with gold, but with the necessities and luxuries for a very active afterlife. There were ornately carved wooden sleds and a working cart with intricate wheels, suggesting journeys over land. There were beds, chests, looms for weaving, and even farming tools. Most astonishing were the fragile remains of textiles, including tapestries that depicted processions of carts and warriors, giving us rare glimpses of Viking art and dress. This was a burial of domestic power and earthly authority. Just a few years later, and not far away, the Gokstad Mound yielded a different story. This ship was larger and sturdier, clearly built for the open ocean and warfare. The skeleton within was of a powerfully built man in his 40s, a warrior king who showed signs of old battle wounds. His burial was simpler but spoke of masculine prestige. Alongside him were the skeletons of 12 horses, 6 dogs, and even 2 peacocks, exotic birds that must have been magnificent symbols of his far-reaching connections. The contrast between the 2 ship burials is profound. Osberg shows us the Viking world of home, craft, and female leadership, packed with the artifacts of daily life and ceremonial travel. Gokstad shows us the world of the warrior, the explorer, and the chieftain, ready for battle and adorned with symbols of prestige. Together, they reveal the core of Viking belief. The ship was not merely a coffin, it was the means of transport to the next realm. The Vikings saw death as a voyage, and what better vessel for that final journey than the one that defined their lives? To be buried in a ship, especially one you may have commanded in life, ensured you could navigate the waters to the afterlife, whether that was to the feasting halls of Valhalla or the mysterious lands of Hell. These buried ships are time capsules of an entire culture's relationship with the sea, death, and status. They make you wonder, what song did the wind sing in the rigging as the earth was finally piled high over the deck, sealing the captain and their crew for a voyage into eternity? The Vikings sailed into eternity aboard their ships, but in the arid valleys of coastal Peru, a different kind of sovereign was laid to rest with a splendor meant to rival the sun itself. For decades, the Moch civilization was a ghost known only through its art. Their stunning pottery depicted elaborate ceremonies, warriors in combat, and mysterious figures in towering regalia. But were these gods, myths, or real people? The answer came in a frantic race against time in 1987. At a site called Sapon, looters were tunneling deep into a large adobe pyramid, a huaca pulling out pieces of gleaming metal. Archaeologist Walter Alva, alerted to the theft, rushed to intervene. What he and his team secured was not just a few artifacts, but an entirely intact royal tomb, the first of its kind ever found in the Americas. They named its occupant the Old Lord of Sapon. As they carefully brushed away the centuries of sand and dirt, a figure of almost unimaginable opulence emerged. He was not simply buried with a few treasures, he was entombed within layers of his own authority. His body was wrapped in fabric, but over that he was dressed for a celestial audience. He wore a magnificent necklace of massive gold and silver peanuts, symbols of fertility and life. On his nose rested a crescent-shaped ornament of solid gold, and dangling from his ears were intricate earspools depicting warriors in miniature. But the most iconic piece was the back flap, a large curved sheet of gold that would have hung from his waist at the back, shimmering like a second sun with every step he took. This was not just jewelry, it was a wearable cosmology. Surrounding him were the proofs of his power and the companions for his journey. The bodies of 3 young women lay nearby, along with a warrior, a military commander, and even a child. A guard at the tomb's entrance had his feet amputated, perhaps to ensure he would never leave his post, and in a poignant touch, the skeleton of a dog rested beside the Lord. This single, undisturbed chamber was a direct window into a world we had only seen in drawings. The Old Lord was not a mythological character on a pot. He was a flesh and blood ruler, a living sun god whose regalia was his divine right. His tomb confirmed that the elaborate scenes of sacrifice and procession shown in Moche art were real rituals performed by a powerful elite. For the first time, we could match the artifact to the artwork, the skeleton to the symbol. This discovery did more than fill a museum. It gave a name and a face to an entire civilization. It showed us that the stories they told on their pottery were their own history, written not in words but in clay and gold. The Golden Lords of Sapon were laid to rest with intention and reverence, but some of the ancient dead were given back to the earth in a far more chilling and enigmatic way. Across the misty wetlands of northern Europe, in the peat bogs of Denmark, Ireland, and the United Kingdom, the earth itself performs a strange kind of magic. Peat, the dense, acidic, and oxygen-poor soil of these bogs, acts as a perfect natural preservative. It tans human skin like leather, turning it a deep, leathery brown while leaving the bones to dissolve away. The result is not a skeleton, but a hauntingly lifelike portrait of a person, often with their final expression still etched upon their face. These are the bog bodies, and they are among the most intimate and disturbing discoveries from the ancient world. Take the Tollund man found in Denmark in 1950. When peat cutters uncovered him, they thought they had discovered a recent murder victim. He looked as if he were merely sleeping. His face is serene, with closed eyes and a gentle stubble still visible on his chin. A simple leather cap rests on his head, but around his neck lies the cause of his death, a braided leather rope tightened into a noose. He was hanged and then carefully laid in a sleeping position in the bog over 2,000 years ago. His preservation is so perfect that scientists could analyze his last meal, a simple porridge of barley and flaxseed. Then there is Grobelman, also from Denmark. His face is more contorted, a frozen grimace. His throat was cut from ear to ear, a wound so deep it nearly decapitated him. His hands show no defensive wounds, suggesting he was held or bound. The condition of these bodies, with their detailed stomach contents and unmarked hands, points away from battlefield casualties or common criminals. The leading theory is that these individuals were chosen for ritual sacrifice. During the Iron Age, communities living near these treacherous, liminal landscapes believed the bogs were gateways to the gods, particularly deities of fertility and the underworld. In times of crisis, such as famine or societal unrest, They may have offered the most valuable thing they had, a human life, to appease the spirits and ensure the land's renewal. The victims were often not outcasts. Toland man's hands were soft, free of the calluses of hard labor. His last meal, while simple, contained seeds from plants that only grow in different seasons, suggesting it was a special, symbolic dish prepared for a ritual. These were not random acts of violence, but calculated, sacred transactions. The bog was the altar, the noose or the blade was the tool, and the perfectly preserved body we find today is the receipt, stamped by the peat and delivered to us millennia later. To look into the face of the Toland man is to stand inches from an ancient ceremony, to witness a moment where faith demanded the ultimate price. It forces a profound and uncomfortable question. What does a society look like when it believes its survival depends on a single, silent offering, sinking slowly into the dark, waiting water? The serene faces preserved in the bog offer a glimpse of sacrificial rites, but in the royal tombs of ancient Greece, we find a different kind of testimony, one written in gold, ivory, and bone. In the late 1970s, a team led by archaeologist Manolis Andronikos was excavating a large burial mound at Vergina in northern Greece, a site he believed was the ancient royal cemetery of Aegae, the first capital of Macedon. For years, the work yielded little. Then, in 1977, they uncovered the entrance to an undisturbed tomb, its ceiling slab still intact. When they entered, the air was still and heavy with the weight of history. They had found what many consider the greatest archaeological discovery in Greek history, the probable tomb of Philip II, the king who transformed Macedon into a military superpower and the father of Alexander the Great. The tomb was a small, vaulted chamber, but its contents were staggering. At its center rested a solid marble sarcophagus. Inside it was not a skeleton, but a magnificent gold larnax, a small chest about the size of a modern suitcase, hammered from 24 pounds of pure gold. Its lid was embossed with the bold, 16-ray star of the Macedonian royal family. When the archaeologists lifted that heavy lid, they found the cremated bones and ashes of a man, wrapped in a magnificent purple and gold cloth that had partially survived the centuries. Resting atop the bones was a delicate, breathtaking crown. It was not a circlet of gold, but an oak wreath, every leaf and acorn sculpted in minute, shimmering detail from thin gold foil, a symbol of divine power and eternal victory. But the tomb held more than regalia, it held portraits. On a funerary couch lay a set of exquisite miniature ivory heads carved with astonishing realism. They depicted Philip himself, his young wife Cleopatra, and their son, the infant Alexander. The portrait of Philip is particularly revealing, showing a strong, bearded man with a commanding gaze. This artistic evidence was powerfully corroborated by the physical remains. Forensic analysis of the cremated bones revealed a devastating injury, a massive, healed wound to the eye socket and cheekbone that would have left the king's face severely scarred and likely blind in one eye. This matched the historical record perfectly, for Philip II was famously wounded by an arrow through the eye during the siege of a city 3 years before his assassination. Here was a king known from history books suddenly rendered in breathtaking, tangible detail. The unlooted tomb provided a perfect archaeological snapshot, a moment frozen at the peak of Macedonian power just before Alexander would explode onto the world stage. The gold larnax and the fragile wreath spoke of a culture that buried its kings not with distant idolatry, but with personal, glorious artifacts that reflected their very identities. To stand before that golden chest is to stand at the precise pivot point of history, looking at the father whose ambitions built the engine that the son would drive to the ends of the known world. It makes you wonder, what whispered ambitions did Alexander himself hear as he looked upon these very symbols of his father's power before setting out to eclipse them all? A king's ghost ship lay beneath a quiet English field for 13 centuries. In the tense summer of 1939, as the shadow of war fell across Europe, a self-taught archaeologist named Basil Brown began digging into one of the mysterious grassy mounds at Sutton Hoo on the estate of a widow named Edith Pretty. Using the methods of a surveyor, he soon uncovered a pattern of iron rivets arranged in the elegant, sweeping lines of a ship's hull. The wood itself had long since rotted away in the acidic soil, but the stain it left in the sand was perfect, a dark phantom of a vessel 88 feet long. This was not a ship that had sailed to this spot. It had been hauled over a mile from the River Deben, an immense funeral barge dragged uphill by hundreds of men to become a mighty tomb. At its center, where the burial chamber would have been built, Brown and the team from the British Museum found not a skeleton, but a treasure that would rewrite a chapter of history. The acidic ground had dissolved the body of the king, but it preserved his staggering wealth in exquisite detail. There were mounds of rusted metal that, when cleaned, revealed themselves as the fittings for a warrior's paradise. A magnificent gold belt buckle, heavy and intricate, lay amidst a hoard of solid gold jewelry. There were coins from Francia and stunning silver bowls and spoons stamped with crosses, imported from the Byzantine Empire, showing connections that stretched from Suffolk to Constantinople. But the most iconic object, the face of this lost kingdom, is the Sutton Hoo helmet. When first found, it was in hundreds of corroded fragments, a shattered iron puzzle. Decades of painstaking reconstruction revealed a masterpiece of artistry and intimidation. It is not just protective gear, it is a mask of power. The brow is adorned with garnet inlaid dragons, their wings sweeping back to form the eyebrows. The nose and mouth form a fierce, mustachioed face, a metallic visage meant to transform the wearer into a supernatural being. A crest of iron, shaped like a flying dragon, runs over the top from front to back. To wear this was to become a legend, half man, half beast, a creature of myth stepping onto the battlefield. Perhaps the most enigmatic treasure was a large, heavy stone carefully placed in the burial. It is a ceremonial whetstone or scepter, topped with a bronze ring holding the carved faces of 4 bearded figures. Its purpose is mysterious, possibly a symbol of royal authority or a link to the wisdom of ancestors. This single, rich, undisturbed burial exploded the myth of the Dark Ages. The era after the Romans left Britain was not a time of primitive collapse and cultural darkness. Sutton Hoo revealed a society of astonishing sophistication, with master metalworkers, complex social hierarchies, and trade networks that spanned continents. Here was a king, likely Reidwold of East Anglia, who commanded enough labor to haul a ship to his grave, and whose wealth proclaimed his place in a wider, connected world. The ghost in the soil became a solid king, and his silent ship proved that even in so-called dark times, the light of artistry and ambition burned brightly. What other forgotten kingdoms lie beneath our feet, their stories waiting only for a curious mind and the turn of a spade to bring them back into the sun? While the first emperor's own mausoleum remains sealed, another nearby discovery has pried open the lavish world of his family. In 2006, construction workers expanding the airport for the city of Xi'an stumbled upon something extraordinary just 10 miles from the terracotta army pits. They had found another vast necropolis, this one dating to the late 4th century BCE, about a century before Qin Shi Huang's death. The scale was staggering, covering an area larger than 100 football fields. At its heart lay a colossal tomb, designated simply as Tomb 1. Its occupant was buried in a manner so extravagant, it forced historians to completely reconsider the origins of Qin imperial ambition. The main burial chamber was accessed by a sloping ramp over 160 feet long, a grand processional way fit for royalty, but the true astonishment lay in the surrounding pits. One contained the remains of a complete, real chariot procession. 12 horse-drawn chariots, each with a team of 4 horses, were lined up as if ready to carry their owner on a journey through the afterlife. These were not models, but actual wooden chariots with bronze fittings, their wheels and axles preserved as ghostly impressions in the earth. the message was one of immense tangible power. Yet the surprises grew stranger. In another pit, archaeologists uncovered a veritable ancient zoo. The skeletons of exotic animals were carefully interred, each in its own small coffin. There were leopards and lynxes, creatures of power and prestige, but most remarkably, they found the complete skeleton of a giant panda, its skull placed neatly beside its body, and a crane with its neck gracefully curved. This was not a haphazard collection. It was a curated menagerie, a display of the tomb owner's ability to command and possess the rarest creatures from across the realm, perhaps even a symbolic garden for eternity. Who commanded such wealth and symbolic power a century before the first emperor? The most compelling theory points to a formidable woman known from fragmentary historical records, Queen Dowager Xia. She was the grandmother of Qin Shi Huang, a powerful regent who essentially ruled the Qin state for a period during the king's minority. Her life was marked by political intrigue and scandal, including a rumored secret affair and the birth of 2 illegitimate sons, but her influence was undeniable. This tomb complex, with its chariots and exotic beasts, suggests the Qin royalty were practicing this language of supreme, godlike authority long before their most famous son unified China. The grandeur was not Qin Shi Huang's invention, it was his inheritance. This discovery peels back a layer, showing that the Terracotta Army and the Mercury Rivers were not a sudden burst of megalomania, but the climax of a dynasty that had spent generations perfecting the art of afterlife theater. It makes you wonder what other hidden progenitors of empire lie in unexcavated ground, their stories waiting to shift the foundations of history we thought we knew. Deep in the Yucatan Peninsula, the ruins of Uxmal stand as a testament to Maya architectural genius with its grand pyramid of the magician. But in 2021, archaeologists working beneath the stone floor of a complex near the palace made a discovery that went beyond grand buildings. They found a hidden tomb, and inside, the remains of a man who had been a lord of this city over 1,000 years ago. His skeleton told a story of high status, but it was his face, or what covered it, that spoke of divinity. Carefully placed over his skull was a funeral mask of astonishing artistry. It was not a single piece of carved stone, but a mosaic, a delicate puzzle assembled from countless pieces of luminous green jade, shimmering mother-of-pearl shell, and dark, gleaming obsidian. Each tiny piece was cut and polished to fit perfectly, recreating the serene features of the Lord in eternal repose. This was not a death mask in the Western sense. For the Maya, jade was far more than a precious stone. It was the ultimate symbol of life, of vitality, and of royal authority. Its color mirrored the first tender shoots of young maize, the very crop that sustained civilization and stood at the heart of their cosmology. To be adorned in jade was to be wrapped in the essence of life itself, a direct connection to the green, growing world. This mask connects the Lord directly to one of the most important figures in the Maya pantheon, the maize god. This deity, often depicted as a beautiful, youthful figure with a headdress of maize, represented death and resurrection in a constant, sacred cycle. He was killed by the lords of the underworld only to be reborn again, symbolizing the annual cycle of planting, harvest, and regeneration. By covering the Lord's face with a jade mosaic, his people were performing a profound act of spiritual transformation. They were not merely burying a ruler, they were preparing him for rebirth. The mask was a magical shell, a new skin of life force stone, ensuring that just as the maize god rose from the underworld, so too would this lord be resurrected in the realm of the ancestors. The dark obsidian pieces, likely forming the pupils of the eyes or the lines of the hair, may have symbolized the night sky or the underworld from which this rebirth would spring. This single artifact, lying quietly in a sealed chamber for centuries, encapsulates the entire Maya vision of death. It was not an end, but a necessary phase in an eternal journey. The Lord was not gone, he was simply being replanted, his identity preserved in a shell of sacred green stone, waiting for the moment to sprout anew into the world of the spirits. What does it mean to face eternity not with a likeness of gold, but with a portrait made from the very symbol of life? The Maya vision of rebirth through jade finds a fascinating echo far across the world in the endless sands of Egypt. For over a century, the spotlight has shone on the grand pyramids and the golden tombs of pharaohs. But just south of Cairo lies a sprawling city of the dead that is quietly and constantly rewriting our understanding of everyday life in the ancient world. This is Saqqara, the vast necropolis for the ancient capital of Memphis, and it is proving to be an archaeological gift that never stops giving. While the pharaohs built their monuments to eternity here, thousands of nobles, priests, and officials were buried in more humble yet infinitely detailed tombs. Recent excavations have turned this area into a hive of discovery, unearthing finds at a pace that feels almost miraculous. In just the past few years, archaeologists have uncovered deep burial shafts containing hundreds of perfectly preserved, painted wooden coffins from the late period, around 2,500 years ago. Each coffin is a masterpiece of protective art covered in intricate hieroglyphs, images of gods, and spells from the Book of the Dead, all rendered in vibrant colors that look as if they were painted yesterday. Inside many, the mummies remain intact, their linen wrappings still bound and often accompanied by a small army of Shabti figurines. These were not mere dolls. Shabtis were magical servants for the afterlife, inscribed with a spell that commanded them to answer the call and perform any labor required by the gods for the deceased. Finding them by the dozens in a single shaft shows how deeply this belief in an active, working afterlife permeated every level of society. But the true revolution at Saqqara is not just in the graves themselves, but in the infrastructure of death that surrounded them. For the first time, archaeologists have uncovered intact embalming workshops. In these complexes, they found clay pots still labeled with the contents and instructions for the mummification process, things like "to be put on his head" or "substance for making the skin pleasant." Nearby, they discovered deep ritual wells where the tools and leftover materials from the sacred process were ceremonially buried. This gives us an unprecedented, step-by-step manual of how the ancient Egyptians perfected the art of preservation, moving from a religious mystery to a detailed, almost industrial practice. Even more telling are the tombs of high officials, decorated with vivid scenes not of solemn gods but of bustling daily life. We see depictions of beer brewing, cattle counting, metalworking, and vibrant musical performances. These walls are administrative records in paint and stone, detailing the bureaucracy, trade networks, and economic engine that powered the kingdom. One tomb belonged to a treasury supervisor named Watai, its walls a breathtaking gallery of color showing every member of his family and his staff, forever frozen in acts of offering and production. Saqqara reveals that the glory of Egypt was not sustained by pharaohs alone, but by a vast, organized middle class of scribes, artisans, and managers who believed their paperwork and craftsmanship would follow them into the next world. This ongoing excavation peels back the gold leaf to show the beating heart of a civilization, proving that sometimes the most astonishing discoveries are not made in a single king's chamber, but in the collective whisper of hundreds of ordinary souls who built an empire. What other mundane receipts and workshop notes buried in the sand are waiting to tell us how a civilization truly operated from the ground up? High in the Altai Mountains, where Russia borders Mongolia and China, the permafrost holds more than just frozen earth. In 1993, archaeologist Natalia Polosmak was excavating a burial mound, or kurgan, on the Yukok Plateau when her team uncovered a solid block of ice at the bottom of the shaft. They carefully melted it with hot water, and as the ice receded, a breathtaking sight emerged. Lying on her side as if asleep was a young woman, her head resting on a felt pillow, dressed in a long woolen skirt and a fine silk blouse. Her skin, preserved in stunning detail by the ice, was a canvas of deep blue tattoos. This was the Princess of Ukok, a woman of the Pazyryk culture who died in the 5th century BCE, and she was a living archive of her people's beliefs. Her burial was a statement of profound importance. She lay inside a hollowed-out large log coffin, sealed and placed in a timber-lined chamber. Beside her, archaeologists found the remains of 6 horses, each adorned with elaborate leather and wooden harnesses, their heads still wearing elaborate masks with carved antlers, transforming them into mythical creatures. A meal of sheep and horse meat was placed with her, sustenance for a long journey. The presence of the horses, so vital to the nomadic Pazyryk, signaled she was a person of immense status, perhaps a noblewoman or a figure of great spiritual power. But it was her body that told the most compelling story. From her shoulders down to her hands, her skin was decorated with intricate tattoos of mythical animals. A griffin-like creature with a beak and antlers stretched across her shoulder. A deer with elaborate flowing antlers adorned her wrist. These were not simple decorations. They were a permanent spiritual armor, a map of her cosmology etched into her flesh. The tattoos were applied using a puncture technique, likely with a needle and soot, and their imagery is deeply symbolic. The animals represent a tiered view of the universe, with creatures of the upper, middle, and lower worlds. They were guardians and guides meant to protect her in life and escort her soul through the different realms after death. Her specific tattoos, combined with items found in her grave like a small pouch of cannabis and a stone dish containing coriander seeds, suggest she may have been more than a princess. Scholars believe she could have been a kind of storyteller, a healer, or a spiritual mediator, a person who used ritual, plants, and the narratives embodied in her tattoos to connect her community with the spirit world. She was a living library, her body a sacred text. The ice did not just preserve her body, it preserved her identity in a way few other burials ever have. We see her not as a skeleton or a collection of artifacts, but as a person with beliefs, status, and a story literally written on her skin. She challenges our assumptions about ancient nomadic life, revealing a complex society with rich artistic traditions and a deep, symbolic relationship with the natural and supernatural world. Her silent, frozen grave asks us a powerful question. What stories do we carry on our own bodies, and what would they tell about us if we were found 1,000 years from now? The tattoos of the Ukok princess spoke of a spiritual world, but in the rocky soil of Greece, a different kind of mark announced the arrival of a legend. In the olive groves near the palace of Nestor at Pylos, archaeologists Jack Davis and Sharon Stocker were running out of time. Their 2015 excavation season was nearly over when their team's trowels struck stone. They had found a stone-lined shaft 5 feet deep, and as they peered inside, their hearts must have raced. Unlike nearly every other Mycenaean tomb ever found, this one was completely undisturbed. The limestone slab sealing it had never been moved in 3,500 years. Inside lay the skeleton of a man in his 30s, stretched out on his back. Around him, from his chest down to his ankles, was a dazzling, chaotic heap of wealth that would take months to carefully catalogue. They named him the Griffin Warrior, for resting on his chest was a single, exquisite ivory plaque, intricately carved with the image of the mythical beast, part eagle, part lion, a symbol of raw power and divine authority. The griffin was just the beginning. This single individual was buried with over 1,500 objects, a concentration of treasure so dense it transformed a modest-looking grave into a king's ransom. 4 solid gold rings lay near his remains, their surfaces etched with detailed scenes of ritual and combat. His weapons were placed beside him, a bronze sword with an ivory hilt lavishly decorated with gold, a dagger, and spearheads. But this was not merely a warrior's kit. There were delicate ivory combs suggesting meticulous personal grooming, and strands of beads made from precious amber, gold, and amethyst. Dozens of engraved sealstones used to stamp signatures in clay were found, each a tiny masterpiece. The sheer variety shattered the old idea of the early Mycenaeans as simple, warlike chieftains. This man was a connoisseur, a diplomat, and a battlefield commander all in one. One object, however, stands as a monument to ancient artistry. It is an agate sealstone, barely an inch and a half wide. When archaeologists cleaned it and examined it under a microscope, they gasped. Carved with unimaginable precision was a scene of lethal combat. A victorious warrior, having already defeated one foe who lies dead at his feet, is now driving his sword into the neck of another enemy. The detail is breathtaking. You can see the muscles straining in the legs, the intricate patterns on the shields, the feathers on the helmet crests. The victor's hair seems to flow with his motion. This tiny gem, meant to be pressed into wax or clay, contains a narrative power and technical skill that rivals anything produced in the later, celebrated eras of Greek art. It proves that the artistic flame of the Greek world burned bright and sophisticated centuries earlier than anyone believed. The Griffin warrior's tomb is a time capsule from a pivotal moment around 1500 BCE, just as the Mycenaean culture was emerging from the shadow of the older Minoan civilization of Crete. Many of his treasures are Minoan in style, yet he was buried on the Greek mainland. This suggests he was not a conqueror who plundered these items, but a powerful local ruler who actively engaged with, traded with, and adopted the symbols of his sophisticated neighbors. He was a bridge between two worlds. His grave goods are a fusion, showing how Mycenaean elites used Minoan artistry to express their own growing power. This one undisturbed shaft forces a complete rewrite of the era's narrative. It shows that the roots of classical Greek civilization were not primitive, but were already deep, rich, and astonishingly cosmopolitan. The Griffin warrior was not a barbarian at the gates of history. He was already inside the palace, adorned in gold, and in possession of art so fine it would not be surpassed for 1,000 years. What other foundational figures of history are still lying in quiet fields, their true sophistication waiting only for a trowel's careful edge to reveal it? Yet for all the splendor of warrior kings, some burial grounds hold a darkness that challenges our very understanding of ancient devotion. On the sun-scorched coast of modern-day Tunisia lie the ruins of Carthage, once the great rival of Rome. Here, outside the ancient city walls, archaeologists uncovered a sacred precinct known as a Tophet. It was not a cemetery in any ordinary sense. Instead, they found row upon row of stone markers, beneath which were buried small ceramic urns. When opened, these urns revealed a heartbreaking content: the charred bones of very young children, from newborns to toddlers, often mixed with the cremated remains of lambs and young goats. The scale is staggering, containing the remains of thousands upon thousands of infants spanning centuries. Ancient Greek and Roman historians, who were Carthage's bitter enemies, wrote with horror of the city's rituals. They described a bronze statue of the god Baal-Hamon, with outstretched arms over a fiery pit, upon which infants were placed as an offering. These accounts, long dismissed as wartime propaganda, gained a terrible new weight with the discovery of the Tophet. Many of the stone markers bear dedicatory inscriptions to the divine couple Baal-Hamon and his consort Tanit, using a formulaic phrase, "vowed to the Lord." This suggests the children were not merely buried, but given. For decades, the consensus was grim and clear. This was evidence of systematic child sacrifice, a desperate pact with cruel gods for favor and protection. The logic within the framework of the time was that nothing could be more valuable to offer than one's own offspring, the ultimate guarantee of a community's future surrendered to secure its present survival. The mixing with young animals or lambs could be seen as symbolic substitutes, but the sheer volume of infant remains pointed to a sustained, institutionalized practice that chilled the modern world. However, a powerful revisionist argument has emerged, offering a less horrific interpretation. Some scholars point to the high rates of infant mortality in the ancient world. They argue the Tophet was simply a sacred cemetery reserved for children who died too young before they were weaned or given a name. The lambs buried with them could be comforting companions for the afterlife. The inscriptions, they suggest, might not mean the child was killed for the god, but was dedicated to the god's care in death. This view asks us to consider if we have projected our own horror onto a culture we know primarily through the writings of its enemies, misinterpreting a poignant communal grief as something monstrous. The debate is far from settled, and that is what makes the Tophet one of archaeology's most profound ethical puzzles. The evidence sits in an agonizing middle ground. The bones show signs of cremation, but not the cause of death. The inscriptions are ambiguous. We are left staring into the ashes of millennia, trying to discern the difference between an act of profound faith and an act of profound tragedy. It forces us to confront the limits of our understanding. Can we ever truly know the intentions of a people whose worldview is lost to time? And which is more unsettling, the thought that a great civilization practiced ritual infanticide, or the thought that we might forever accuse them of a crime they did not commit? The urns remain silent, holding a truth that is either too terrible to speak or one we have simply failed to hear. The ashes of Carthage present a haunting mystery of intention, but in the golden soil of Macedonia, the message was one of glorious and unambiguous triumph. In 1962, construction workers building a new road near the village of Derveni, not far from ancient Thessaloniki, struck stone. What they had found was not a foundation, but the roof of a tomb. Archaeologists called to the site would uncover a burial chamber from the 4th century BCE, a time when the kingdom of Macedon was ascending to dominate the Greek world. Inside, they found the cremated remains of a nobleman, but it was the manner of his burial that took their breath away. His ashes had been carefully placed inside a large bronze vessel, a volute crater typically used for mixing wine and water at lavish symposia. This was no ordinary pot. It is a masterpiece of Hellenistic metalwork covered in elaborate repoussé reliefs depicting a vivid mythological scene. The god Dionysus, relaxed and powerful, lounges beside his wife Ariadne, while a frenzied retinue of satyrs and maenads dance around them in ecstatic celebration. The vessel itself was a statement, transforming a symbol of life's finest pleasures into a container for death, suggesting the funeral was the ultimate eternal banquet. But the true astonishment lay in what was placed beside this magnificent urn. The tomb contained a collection of golden wreaths so delicate and perfect, they seemed to have been plucked from an enchanted garden just moments before. There were wreaths of shimmering myrtle leaves, their tiny berries gleaming, and others of majestic oak leaves with perfectly formed acorns, all crafted from thin, hammered gold foil. These were not crowns in the rigid, regal sense. They were supple, designed to be worn, and they carried a profound symbolic weight. In the Greek world, wreaths were prizes awarded to victors in athletic games, poetic contests, and military triumphs. To be buried with them was to declare oneself a victor in the greatest contest of all, the journey through death. The oak, sacred to Zeus, symbolized strength, endurance, and divine favor. The myrtle was sacred to Aphrodite and Dionysus, representing love, immortality, and the joys of life that persist beyond the grave. Together, they wove a narrative of a successful life, worthy of celebration, and a soul prepared for a victorious transition. This tomb offers a crystalline window into the Hellenistic worldview, a philosophy that blossomed after the conquests of Alexander the Great. It was an era deeply concerned with personal destiny and the hope for individual immortality. Unlike earlier Greek beliefs in a shadowy, joyless underworld, the Hellenistic period saw the rise of mystery cults like those of Dionysus and Orpheus, which promised initiates a blessed afterlife. The Derveni crater, with its scene of divine bliss and the golden wreaths acting as victory laurels, are physical manifestations of this hope. The nobleman was not being sent to a grim Hades. He was being equipped and celebrated for his arrival at a divine symposium, an eternal festival where he would join the gods themselves. His ashes were not interred with fear, but with the trappings of a hero who had completed his earthly labors. The care taken to fashion leaves that would never wilt speaks to a desire for a perfection that transcends decay, a beauty that death itself could not touch. This small, rich tomb asks us a quieter question than those of grand sacrifices or imperial armies. What would you choose to wear for eternity if your final adornment was meant to tell the story of your life's greatest victories? Gold wreaths promised a victor's welcome in the afterlife, but in the heart of modern London, a stone box spoke of a different kind of victory, the quiet persistence of home. In 1999, archaeologists excavating ahead of a new development at Spitalfields, just east of the old Roman wall, uncovered something extraordinary for Britain: a massive, beautifully carved stone sarcophagus. Such coffins were incredibly rare in the province of Britannia, a sign of immense wealth and status typically reserved for the Italian heartland. When the heavy lid was carefully lifted, they found it was lined with thick sheets of lead, an additional layer of protection. Inside lay the skeleton of a young woman, no more than 25 years old when she died in the 4th century. She had been buried in a remarkable state of preservation, and she was not alone. Resting on her chest was a collection of exquisite personal treasures: a glass phial that once held perfume, a delicate jet bracelet, and a jet pendant. Jet, a fossilized wood that could be polished to a deep, glossy black, was a luxury material mined in Britain but prized across the empire. These were not local trinkets, they were the accessories of a cosmopolitan elite. The most telling clue, however, lay in the fine residue of soil around her body. Microscopic analysis revealed traces of gold thread. This woman had not been buried in a simple shroud, but in a garment of silk intricately embroidered with real gold. The image was stunning: a young woman laid to rest in a gown that would have shimmered in the lamplight of her funeral, a radiant declaration of her family's fortune. But who was she? Forensic artists used her skull to reconstruct her face, revealing the features of a woman with a strong jaw and wide-set eyes. More fascinating than her appearance was her origin. Isotope analysis of her teeth, which lock in the chemical signature of the water a person drinks in childhood, told a compelling story. She was not born in rainy Britannia. The minerals in her teeth matched the geology of southern Europe, likely Rome itself or its surrounding regions. This was a Roman woman in the truest sense, who had traveled to the distant, misty frontier of the empire. Her burial in a stone sarcophagus, a profoundly Roman tradition, was a deliberate act. In a land still inhabited by native Britons and administered by a mixed population, this was a statement of identity. Her family was declaring, even in death, that they were not of this cold northern place. They were Romans, maintaining the customs, the fashions, and the material culture of the imperial center. The Spitalfields sarcophagus paints a vivid portrait of Londinium not as a rough military outpost, but as a thriving, multicultural hub where the ultra-wealthy could live a life of Mediterranean luxury. This young woman, with her gold-threaded silk and exotic jet, lived in a bubble of Roman civilization, a world of imported wine, heated baths, and sophisticated manners, all maintained thousands of miles from home. Her poignant burial asks us what we cling to when we are far from the place we call home. Is our truest identity something we wear even into the earth to remind ourselves and the world of who we truly are? Her silk gown spoke of empire, but 12,000 years earlier, a very different kind of power was being laid to rest. In a small cave in what is now Israel, known as Hilazon Taktit, a community gathered to bury one of their own. The year was roughly 10,000 BC, a time when humans were just beginning to settle down, to build the first villages and forge the first bonds of complex society. The person they placed in a carefully dug pit was a woman about 45 years old, a considerable age for that era. Her body told a story of a difficult life. She had a pronounced spinal deformity that would have given her a distinct hunched posture and likely caused her pain. She may have walked with a limp. In most survival-based cultures, such a disability could have made her a burden, but her burial reveals she was anything but. She was interred with a collection of objects so strange and deliberate it stops the heart. Laid around and beneath her were the complete shells of 50 tortoises. The meat had been carefully removed, meaning these were not a food offering but empty vessels, perhaps symbolic containers for something spiritual. Placed beside her were the severed wingtips of a golden eagle, a powerful raptor that soars at the edge of the human world. They found the pelvis of a leopard, a creature of supreme stealth and strength. And most haunting of all, they found the foot of a human being, someone much larger than she was, placed there as a deliberate artifact. This was not a random pile of bones. This was a curated toolkit for the afterlife. Archaeologists who studied the grave came to a stunning conclusion. This woman was likely a shaman. In hunter-gatherer societies, individuals who were different, those who experienced visions, seizures, or lived with physical anomalies were often seen as having a foot in both worlds, the human and the spirit. Her deformity may have marked her as uniquely qualified to communicate with forces beyond ordinary understanding. The animals buried with her were her spiritual allies. The tortoise, a creature that carries its home on its back, might have symbolized transformation or protection. The eagle wings could have granted her the ability to travel to the upper world in trance states. The leopard pelvis connected her to the raw, predatory power of the night. The human foot is the most enigmatic, possibly a trophy of power or a relic representing a connection to an ancestor or a vanquished foe. This tiny cave burial is a seismic discovery. It pushes back the evidence for complex ritual and specialized social roles by thousands of years. Before agriculture, before cities, before writing, humans were already crafting a cosmology. They were investing profound care in someone whose value was not in physical labor, but in spiritual insight. At the dawn of settled life, they understood that survival required more than just food and shelter. It required a mediator who could plead with the rains, interpret the flight of birds, and guide the souls of the dead. This woman, set apart by her body, was elevated by her community because of her mind and her perceived connection to the unseen. Her grave asks us a fundamental question about our own origins. When did we first look at a member of our tribe and see not just a pair of hands, but a bridge to the divine? Music was the unseen companion in that silent death pit at Ur. Among the treasures of the royal cemetery, one object sings louder than all others, a masterpiece known as the Great Lyre. It was discovered in what is called the King's Grave, a tomb that also contained the remains of dozens of attendants, and it is more than an instrument. It is a portal to the sounds of the world's first cities. The lyre itself was made of wood which decayed long ago in the Mesopotamian soil, but its magnificent decorations were pressed into the earth, leaving a perfect impression. When carefully excavated and reconstructed, its glory was revealed. The sound box was crowned with the head of a bearded bull, crafted from solid gold, with a lush, flowing beard and majestic horns of lapis lazuli, that deep blue stone imported from distant Afghanistan. This was not just an animal, it was a symbol of divine power and fertility, a creature of both heaven and earth. Below this golden guardian, the front of the sound box was inlaid with a series of small shell plaques, each one carved with a scene from Sumerian mythology. We see animals walking upright, acting like humans, serving at a banquet and playing instruments of their own. A lion carries a table laden with food, a bear steadies a lyre, a donkey strums a different instrument, and a fox appears to be dancing with a rattle. This whimsical, almost surreal procession is a glimpse into a rich world of story and belief, a narrative played out every time the strings were plucked. For the Sumerians, music was not mere entertainment. It was a sacred technology, a vital force that could soothe gods, mourn the dead, and guide souls through the perilous journey to the underworld. A lyre of this staggering opulence would have been played during the king's funeral rites, its deep, resonant tones filling the air with a solemn, haunting beauty meant to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. The bull's head likely represented a specific deity, perhaps the sun god Utu, who judged the souls of the deceased, its golden face watching over the ceremony. To hear its music was to participate in a cosmic order. This single artifact gives us two profound connections. First, it provides a direct artistic link, showing us the imagery and craftsmanship that decorated their palaces and temples. Second, and more miraculously, it offers a sonic link. In 2002, a team of musicians and archaeologists built a precise replica of the Great Lyre based on the excavation records. When they plucked its strings for the first time in over 4,500 years, the sound that echoed out was deep, melancholic, and powerful, the very sound of Sumerian grief and hope. That tone is the closest we will ever come to hearing the heartbeat of a civilization at the moment it said farewell to its king. It makes you wonder, what hymns did they play as the attendants drank their final cup and lay down to sleep, the golden bull watching in the lamplight as the last note faded into the earth? The golden bull's final note fell silent, but 2,000 years later and a world away, another tomb achieved what seemed impossible, preserving not just artifacts but life itself. In 1971, workers digging an air raid shelter near the city of Changsha in China broke into a hillside and discovered a vast waterlogged pit. Archaeologists were called in, and what they uncovered would become one of the most extraordinary medical and archaeological finds of all time. This was the tomb of Xinjui, the Marquise of Dai, a noblewoman who died around 168 BC during the prosperous Han Dynasty. When they opened the innermost of four nested, beautifully lacquered coffins, they were met with a sight that defied all logic. Lady Di was not a skeleton nor a leathery mummy. She looked as if she had died only weeks before. Her skin was still supple and resilient to the touch. Her limbs retained flexibility at the joints. Her eyelashes and the hair in her nostrils were intact. Even the arteries in her brain still held remnants of blood, allowing scientists to determine she had type of blood. This was not preservation, it was a suspension of decay for over 2,000 years. The secret lay in the tomb's ingenious engineering. Her coffins were sealed within a massive, airtight chamber 20 feet deep. The builders had lined this chamber with a thick layer of charcoal to absorb moisture and then packed it with dense, water-retaining clay. Once sealed, the tomb became a perfectly balanced environment. All the oxygen was quickly consumed by bacteria, creating a sterile, anaerobic void where decay-causing organisms could not survive. It was a time capsule sealed by physics. The tomb was a snapshot of aristocratic Han life, frozen at the moment of her funeral. Beside her were meticulously laid out meals, including soup, rice, and various meats, still recognizable in their lacquerware bowls. There were over 1,000 other artifacts, from silk robes and cosmetics to wooden figurines representing her servants, but one discovery overshadowed even her physical state. Archaeologists found a library of silk scrolls, and among them were texts that revolutionized our understanding of ancient science. One scroll, known as the Wuxia Bingfang, or Recipes for 52 Ailments, is a medical manual. Another, the Daeyin Tu, illustrates graceful gymnastic exercises for health. Most astonishing was a set of charts now called the Mawangdui silk texts. These include the world's oldest known anatomical atlas, depicting pathways of the body that would later form the basis of acupuncture meridians. They reveal a sophisticated, systematic understanding of the human body that was centuries ahead of its time in the West. Lady Di's own body provided a tragic medical record. An autopsy revealed she suffered from a host of modern ailments, including coronary heart disease, gallstones, and severe parasites. She was overweight and largely sedentary, a life of luxury that ultimately led to a fatal heart attack, likely triggered by a painful gallstone episode. Her tomb gives us two unparalleled gifts: the physical reality of a Han Dynasty noblewoman and the intellectual framework of the medicine that tried and ultimately failed to save her. She is a direct conversation across millennia, her very flesh and the scrolls beside her telling a complete story of life, death, and the pursuit of health in the ancient world. What does it mean to meet the past not through its bones or its gold, but through a face we could almost recognize and a pulse we could almost feel? The body of Lady Di was a medical manuscript written in flesh and blood, but another noblewoman's grave, found half a world away, held a different kind of text, one written in bronze, gold, and astonishing scale. In the winter of 1953, near the village of Vix in eastern France, a local amateur archaeologist began excavating a large tumulus, an ancient burial mound. As he cleared the earth from the central chamber, his tools revealed the outline of a wooden funerary cart, and beside it, the skeletal remains of a woman. But it was the object looming over her that made history. Towering beside the cart was a colossal bronze vessel, a volute crater, standing 1.64 meters tall, over 5 feet. It was not merely large, it was monumental, the largest metal vessel to survive from the entire ancient world. The woman had been buried in the 6th century BCE, a time when this region was the domain of Celtic tribes, part of what archaeologists call the Hallstatt culture. Yet this crater was not Celtic. It was a masterpiece of Greek craftsmanship, likely produced in a workshop in Sparta or Corinth. Its surface was decorated with a frieze of hoplite soldiers and chariots in relief, and its handles were cast in the form of fierce, staring gorgons. This single object placed a remote Celtic hill fort at the center of a trade network that stretched over 1,000 miles to the Mediterranean coast. The woman herself was a figure of immense local power. Around her neck rested a magnificent torque, a rigid neck ring of solid gold weighing nearly a pound. Its ends were sculpted into the stylized, powerful hooves of a mythical creature, perhaps a winged horse, a symbol of both mobility and otherworldly strength. She was adorned with other jewelry of amber and bronze, and the presence of the dismantled cart suggested a ceremonial procession for her final journey. This was no ordinary woman. She is often called the Princess of Vix, though she was likely a chieftain in her own right, a leader who controlled the vital trade routes along the Seine and Rhone rivers. Her grave goods tell a story of strategic exchange. The Celts of the interior had something the Greek colonies on the coast desperately wanted: access to the rich resources of northern Europe, things like tin, amber, and slaves. In return, the Celts coveted the luxury goods and wine of the Mediterranean world. This crater was the ultimate prestige item, a diplomatic gift or a purchase of staggering value, meant for mixing wine at the most elite feasts. Its presence in a Celtic tomb reveals a sophisticated political landscape. This woman was not a barbarian chieftain in a remote backwater. She was a key node in a pan-European economy, a ruler who understood the language of Greek symbolism and used it to amplify her own authority. To host a feast from such a vessel was to demonstrate a reach that connected the alpine forests to the Aegean Sea. Her burial asks us to redraw the map of the ancient world, not as isolated cultures, but as a connected web where a Celtic princess could be toasted with Greek wine, served from a pot so large it must have held the dreams of an entire tribe. What other alliances and understandings were sealed with a cup poured from that crater's majestic lip, before it was finally buried to accompany its owner into a legend of her own? The bones of a Celtic princess spoke of individual power, but beneath the streets of Paris lies a monument to the anonymous dead, a number so vast it numbs the mind. The catacombs of Paris are not an ancient necropolis, but an early modern solution to a crisis of the living. By the late 18th century, the city's cemeteries, particularly the massive Les Innocents in the city center, were catastrophically overflowing. Centuries of burials in shallow, crowded pits had created a ghastly public health nightmare. The soil was so saturated with decomposing matter that it rose several feet above the surrounding streets, and cellars in neighboring buildings oozed with a foul, contaminated slurry. The stench was unbearable and the risk of disease was palpable. The Enlightenment city, champion of reason and public order, could no longer tolerate this medieval chaos. The solution was both practical and chilling. Authorities decided to relocate the bones, clearing the cemeteries and transferring the remains to the abandoned limestone quarries that tunneled beneath the city's southern neighborhoods. Beginning in 1786, a nightly procession of black-draped wagons began their solemn work, carrying millions of skeletons into the depths. This was not a respectful reburial of intact bodies, but a logistical operation. The bones were stripped of any remaining identity, sorted by type, and then stacked with a strange, macabre artistry. The catacombs today are a surreal landscape. Long femurs and tibias are arranged in neat, geometric walls, punctuated by rows of skulls that form grim patterns. In some chambers, skulls are arranged in hearts or crosses, a dark humor or a somber piety from the workers who stacked them. Plaques carved into the stone pillars label the former cemeteries from which the bones originated, the only remaining hint of a person's final resting place. Walking through these narrow, damp passageways is an encounter with sheer scale. The remains of over 6 million Parisians line the walls, a silent majority from centuries past. This was not an act of reverence for individuals, but a necessary reordering of urban space in the name of public health and modern hygiene. It reflects a profound shift in attitude. In Enlightenment Europe, death was being pushed out of the daily life of the city. Churchyards in crowded neighborhoods were seen as unscientific hazards, not sacred ground. The catacombs represent the moment the dead were literally sanitized and hidden from view, transformed from a community of ancestors underfoot into a managed subterranean archive. It asks us a disquieting question about our own cities. What forgotten infrastructures of death lie beneath our sidewalks and parks? And what does it mean when we decide that the past must be tidied away, its faces reduced to a pattern in a wall for the comfort of the present? While the catacombs anonymized millions, one Han Dynasty prince was determined that his individual identity would survive forever, wrapped not in gold but in stone. In 1968, soldiers digging air raid shelters in the mountains of Hebei Province, China, broke into a hidden cave. They had not found a natural cavern but a man-made tomb, and inside lay a site that seemed pulled from legend. This was the resting place of Liu Sheng, a prince of the Western Han Dynasty who died around 113 BCE, and his wife, Du Wan. The tomb itself was carved deep into the rock, a labyrinth of chambers meant to replicate his earthly palace. But the true astonishment lay within the inner sanctum. There, on stone platforms, were the prince and princess, but they were not merely skeletons. Each was encased from head to toe in a shimmering second skin of jade. These were the legendary jade burial suits, artifacts so rare and costly they were thought to be mythical until this moment. The suit of Liu Sheng was assembled from 2,498 individually carved rectangular and square plaques of nephrite jade, a tough, greenish stone revered above all others. His wife's suit used 2,156 pieces. Each small plate was meticulously polished, its corners drilled with tiny holes. Then, using fine gold wire, artisans had threaded these thousands of pieces together, like a three-dimensional puzzle, to form a complete human shape with separate sections for the head, torso, arms, and legs. The headpiece alone was a masterpiece, with jade plates forming the face, complete with covers for the eyes and nose. To see it reassembled is to see a ghostly, geometric portrait, a rigid armor of eternity. The belief behind this staggering effort was absolute. The Han Chinese did not seek to preserve the soft body like the Egyptians. They believed that jade possessed a vital, magical property. It was incorruptible. While flesh would inevitably decay, jade was eternal. They thought that if the body was entirely encased in this imperishable stone, it would somehow protect the physical form from dissolution, thereby allowing the soul or the Po soul to remain intact and housed forever. The gold wire was not just a fastener, it was symbolic, representing the heavenly, unbreakable bond that held this protective shell together. The cost was astronomical. Each suit represented years of labor, from mining the rare nephrite in distant cotton to the painstaking cutting and drilling by master craftsmen, a process that would have worn through countless bronze drills and tons of abrasive sand. This was an expense only the imperial family could bear, a literal fortune sewn into a funeral shroud. The discovery of Liu Sheng and Du Wan's suits confirmed ancient historical texts that described such burials but had never been verified. It showed the extreme lengths to which the Han elite would go to conquer death itself. They built empires, wrote poetry, and forged trade routes, but their deepest ambition was to stop time, to use the most enduring material on Earth to cage their mortal essence. It was a breathtaking failure, of course. Inside the beautiful stone cages, their bones had turned to dust, just like any commoners. Yet the suits remain empty and serene, a testament not to immortality achieved, but to the profound, universal human longing to be remembered, to be preserved, to be more than just a memory fading in the soil. What does it say about us that we will mine mountains and thread gold through stone, all in a silent, desperate bargain with oblivion? Gold had already become a language of power, spoken in whispers long before the first stones of the pyramids were laid. In 1972, on the shores of a Black Sea lake in Bulgaria, a tractor driver digging a trench for an electrical cable struck something that would turn the timeline of human ambition upside down. His blade unearthed not just soil, but a glint of yellow metal and a scattering of ancient bones. This accidental scratch on the surface led to the excavation of the Varna necropolis, a Chalcolithic or Copper Age cemetery dating to an almost incomprehensible 4560 to 4450 before the Common Era. That is over 6,500 years ago, a millennium and a half before the Great Pyramids of Giza. And here, in these quiet graves, archaeologists found the oldest processed gold ever discovered on Earth. The cemetery held 310 graves, and the story they told was one of shocking inequality, frozen in time. The majority of the burials were simple. The individuals were laid to rest with a few stone tools, simple pottery, or shells from the nearby sea. They were the common people of their age, but a handful of graves were different. They were chambers of dazzling, concentrated wealth that defied all expectations for such an ancient period. One grave, catalogued simply as Grave 43, contained the remains of a high-status male. He was not buried with a few trinkets, he was adorned with a king's ransom. On his body were over 990 gold objects. There were beads sewn onto his clothing, heavy bracelets on his arms, and even a sheath of solid gold for his penis, a symbolic covering of immense potency. Beside him lay a stone scepter with a gold-capped handle, a copper axe with a gold-plated shaft, and a stunning ceramic bowl with a lid of solid gold. The sheer weight and craftsmanship of the gold was staggering, representing a technological leap that no one thought possible for that era. This was not gold panned from a river and hammered crudely. This was refined, worked, and alloyed with other metals to achieve different colors and strengths. The artisans of Varna mastered techniques like casting, hammering, and soldering. They created beads so tiny and perfect they rival later jewelry. They understood the material's symbolic weight, literally and figuratively. But the true revelation of Varna was not the gold itself, but what its distribution revealed about the human story. Here, in this lakeside community from the dawn of metalworking, we see the birth of a rigid social hierarchy. The presence of a few lavishly equipped graves amidst many simple ones is the world's earliest clear archaeological evidence of a stratified society, of a ruling elite that had consolidated both wealth and spiritual authority. The gold was not currency, it was something more profound, a materialization of power, prestige, and a direct connection to the divine or the eternal. Those buried with it were not just rich, they were considered fundamentally different. perhaps seen as intermediaries between the community and the forces of nature. The ceremonial axes and scepters were not weapons of war, but instruments of ritual authority. Varna proves that the human drive to create systems of inequality, to use rare materials to signify godlike status, is not a product of advanced empires. It is a fundamental shift that occurred at the very cradle of technological innovation, the moment we learned to transform stone into metal. While the Egyptians would later perfect the art of the golden tomb, the people of Varna invented the concept. They looked at a soft, shining metal and saw not just a beautiful object, but the very foundation of a new social order, one where a person's worth could be measured in sunlight captured and buried deep within the earth. What does it say about us that our first great technological triumph was immediately used to build walls between ourselves, to create kings and commoners before we even had a word for either? The glittering gold of Varna announced the birth of kings, but in the arid river valleys of Peru, a different kind of sovereign was being prepared for eternity. For decades, the vivid murals and pottery of the Moche civilization showed a recurring, enigmatic figure. This was the priestess or the sacrificer, a person clad in rich robes and an immense, elaborate headdress, often shown holding a ceremonial goblet during rituals of life, death, and sacrifice. Art historians debated, was this a goddess, a mythical archetype, or a representation of a real office? The answer came not from a single tomb, but from a sacred cemetery that became a revelation. At the site of San Jose de Moro, beginning in the early 1990s, archaeologists began uncovering a series of spectacular burials that dated to the later Moche period. The tombs were deep, adobe-lined chambers, and the individuals within were buried with a wealth of regalia that took the breath away. But the true shock was not the wealth, it was the biology. These were not the bodies of men, they were women, and they were buried with the exact regalia of the priestess from the art. One of the most significant burials was that of a woman now known as the priestess of San Jose de Moro. She was laid to rest in a chamber filled with offerings, but the objects that defined her were placed directly with her body. On her head was a massive, intricate headdress made of gilded copper, its form mimicking the towering crescent moons and complex designs seen in the murals. Beside her were the tools of her office, including fine ceramic vessels and, most importantly, the ceremonial cup or kiro. This was not a drinking vessel for everyday use. It was the central prop in the state rituals depicted on Moche pottery, used for offering chicha, the sacred corn beer, to the gods or for consuming it during ceremonies that bound the community together. Her tomb contained multiple such cups, some of the finest quality ever found. This was not an isolated case. Several other women were found in similar tombs at the same site, all adorned with the insignia of the highest religious authority. The message from the dust was unequivocal. The priestess was not a myth. She was a powerful historical office, and it was held by women. These women were not simply priestesses in a narrow, ceremonial sense. In the Moche world, religion and politics were inseparable. The performance of ritual was the engine of the state. The person who presided over the sacrifices, who communed with the deities, who controlled the ceremonial calendar that dictated planting and harvest, held ultimate power. By burying these women with the full regalia of the sacrificer, the Moche were declaring that they had performed that role in life. They were the mediators between the human world and the divine, the individuals responsible for maintaining the cosmic order that ensured water would flow, crops would grow, and the kingdom would endure. Their tombs, equal in splendor to any male rulers, proved that gender was no barrier to the highest echelons of Moche power. This discovery forced a dramatic rewrite of our understanding of pre-Columbian societies. It shattered the simplistic assumption that ancient complex societies were universally patriarchal, ruled solely by warrior kings. Here was clear, material evidence that women could occupy the apex of spiritual and political authority, commanding the rituals that defined civilization itself. These priestesses were not silent partners or symbolic figureheads. They were the conductors of the sacred symphony, their hands holding the cup from which the fate of their people was drunk. What other powerful women have we missed in the archaeological record, simply because we were not looking for their faces beneath the headdresses we assumed only men could wear? The frozen tombs of the Altai held tattooed priestesses, but on the windswept steppe of Siberia, a different nomadic culture interred its royalty with a ferocity of gold that defies the imagination. In 2001, in the remote Tuva Republic, a Russian-German archaeological team opened a burial mound known as Arjun II. The kurgan was vast, but looters had plundered the central chamber centuries ago. Undeterred, the team kept digging around the edges, and there, in a peripheral timber-lined chamber, they struck the archaeological equivalent of a supernova. They had found an intact double burial of a Scythian noble couple from the 7th century before the Common Era, a time when these legendary horse lords dominated the Eurasian steppe. The chamber was a frozen moment of nomadic opulence. The man and woman lay side by side, their bodies transformed into constellations of precious metal. Around the man's neck rested a solid gold neck-torque, a rigid collar of breathtaking weight, over 4 pounds of pure hammered gold. Its ends were sculpted into intricate coils, and the entire surface was decorated with a mesmerizing procession of carved animals, a miniature bestiary of the steppe. At his hip lay his dagger, its hilt and sheath completely sheathed in gold, every inch covered in the same vibrant animal-style art depicting stags, tigers, and mythical beasts locked in eternal combat. But the true, overwhelming spectacle was their clothing. Their tunics, trousers, and headdresses had not merely been embroidered with gold thread. They had been entirely covered in tiny, stamped golden panther figurines. Over 5,000 of them. Each big cat was captured in a sinuous, leaping pose, a symbol of speed, power, and predatory grace. As the excavators brushed away the soil, these thousands of golden panthers cascaded into their hands, a shimmering, metallic pelt that would have made the rulers appear to be walking embodiments of the sun itself, their every movement a ripple of liquid light. This was not just wealth, it was a declaration of identity. The Scythians were masters of the saddle, a people defined by movement, animal husbandry, and warfare. They did not build cities or palaces. Their power was portable, and their art reflected that world. The animal-style motifs that covered their gold, the coiled predators, the struggling herbivores, were more than decoration. They were a spiritual language, a way of capturing the vital, untamed energy of the creatures they lived alongside and hunted. To wear this art was to harness that energy. The gold itself, likely mined from the Altai or Ural mountains, was a medium for freezing that dynamic life force into a permanent, dazzling form. The intact burial at Arjun II gives us an unparalleled view into their elaborate funeral rites for the elite. The couple was not alone. They were accompanied by a grim retinue. In separate chambers around them lay the bodies of 33 other individuals, including warriors in full armor and 14 horses, each sacrificed and buried with elaborate bridles and saddles. This was a complete court, a mobile kingdom in miniature, sent into the earth to serve their lord and lady in the afterlife. The Scythians believed in a vibrant world beyond death, one where status, warfare, and feasting continued. To ensure their rulers arrived in style, they provided everything from golden weapons to loyal companions to herds of spirit horses. This tomb, untouched by time and thieves, captures the essence of the Scythian paradox, a culture of fierce nomads who carried their staggering civilization on horseback, leaving behind not crumbling walls, but these silent, golden-filled kurgans that dot the steppe like forgotten crowns. What does it mean to build an empire not of stone, but of leather, horseflesh, and a mastery of metal so complete that you could weave sunlight into the very fabric of your identity? A skeleton can hold more than just the story of a life. It can archive the story of a plague, In 2009, archaeologists working at the ancient site of Balathal in Rajasthan, India, uncovered a burial that was unusual from the start. The individual, a young man, had not been interred in the communal cemetery. Instead, he was placed alone outside the settlement walls, his body sealed within a large, sterile-looking mud brick enclosure. This isolation in death was the first clue that something was profoundly different. When scientists examined his bones, they found the second, more definitive clue. The skeletal lesions were unmistakable. The bones of his face, particularly around his nose and upper jaw, showed the classic pitting and erosion caused by a slow, relentless bacterial invader. This was the earliest definitive evidence of leprosy in the world, dating back over 4,000 years. The man from Balathal is, in a sense, patient zero in the archaeological record, his bones a grim diagnosis etched in calcium. His lonely, segregated burial speaks volumes. It tells us that even 4 millennia ago, communities understood this disease was different. They recognized its disfiguring nature and its terrifying permanence. The act of walling him away in a brick tomb was not necessarily an act of cruelty, but one of fearful protocol, an attempt to contain what they could not cure. This single skeleton is a keystone in a much larger arch of understanding. Burial sites are unparalleled archives for the science of paleopathology, the study of ancient disease. Every grave is a potential medical record, with bones acting as a ledger of lifelong health, nutrition, and trauma. By studying skeletal remains from different periods and regions, scientists can track the evolution of pathogens like the leprosy bacillus or the tuberculosis bacterium. They can see when a disease first appears in a population, how its physical effects manifest over centuries, and even trace its migration routes alongside human trade and conquest. The Balathal skeleton pushes the known history of leprosy back by hundreds of years and anchors its origin in South Asia, supporting genetic studies of the modern bacterium. But it does more than just mark a point on a timeline. It helps us understand the complex dance between humans and our microscopic adversaries. The presence of a disease in a skeleton means that person lived with it for a long time. Leprosy is slow-moving. To have the bone damage seen at Balathal, the man must have survived with the infection for years. This tells a subtle story of early human immunity and community care. Despite his eventual isolation in death, he was kept alive, perhaps fed and sheltered by his people for a significant period. His bones record not just the pathogen's attack, but also the human capacity for endurance and the grim societal decisions that follow when an illness alters a face, the most fundamental marker of human identity. Each ancient skeleton like his is a data point in humanity's long war against invisibility. They remind us that our battles with pandemics are not modern phenomena, but ancient chapters in a story written in bone, a story where every grave holds a clue to the plagues that shaped us and the resilience that carried us through. A single elephant tusk over 6 feet long lay beside the body like a scepter from another world. In 2008, at the vast Copper Age site of Valencia in southern Spain, archaeologists uncovered a tomb that seemed to defy the logic of its time. Dated between 2875 and 2635 before the Common Era, this was a single burial in a simple pit, yet its contents were of staggering, almost alien opulence. The individual was accompanied by a treasure that spoke of connections spanning continents. Alongside that monumental tusk which had traveled from Africa lay an exquisite dagger. Its blade was not bronze or copper, but a single, flawless piece of rock crystal, translucent and sharp, mounted on an ivory handle. The grave held flint blades, finely carved ivory containers, and beads made from amber from the Baltic north and delicate discs of ostrich eggshell from the African south. This was not a local chieftain, but a figure of global reach, buried with the rarest materials the ancient world could offer. For over a decade, this magnificent burial was known as the Tomb of the Ivory Lady. The grave goods, lacking the traditional markers of weaponry like arrowheads and the presence of such precious, exotic items, led researchers to assume this was a woman of supreme status, perhaps a priestess or a ruler in her own right. It was a compelling narrative that challenged assumptions about power in prehistory. Then, science offered a stunning correction. In 2023, researchers used a new technique called peptide analysis on the teeth. This method can detect the proteins linked to the amelogenin gene, which differs between the X and Y chromosomes. The results were clear: the Ivory Lady was biologically male. This revelation did not diminish the tomb's importance, it deepened the mystery exponentially. The discovery forces a complete re-evaluation of gender, wealth, and identity in Copper Age Iberia. Here was a man buried without the typical symbols of masculine warrior power. Instead, his status was proclaimed through artistry, exotic trade, and ritual objects. The rock crystal dagger was likely never meant for battle. It was a ceremonial object, a tool of spiritual authority or a symbol of purity, its clarity perhaps believed to hold magical properties. The elephant tusk was not a weapon, but a raw display of impossible procurement, a testament to his ability to command or facilitate trade across the Strait of Gibraltar. This man's power was not rooted in the force of arms, but in the force of connection. He was a broker of the rare and the sacred, a person whose influence derived from controlling the flow of knowledge, materials, and perhaps spiritual practices across vast distances. His burial suggests a society where leadership could be multifaceted. Authority might not have been strictly divided along binary lines of male warrior and female priestess. An individual could attain the highest social pinnacle through means other than warfare, through a mastery of trade networks, ritual expertise, or artistic patronage. The Ivory Man's tomb stands as a profound reminder that our modern categories often fail to map onto ancient realities. His grave goods tell us less about whether he was a man or a woman, and more about what his community valued most: the ability to bridge worlds, to turn the distant and the magical into a local reality, and to wear that power not on a sword belt, but in the cool, perfect light of a crystal blade and the ancient curve of an elephant's tooth. What other foundational figures of history have we quietly mislabeled because we assumed their treasures spoke a language we already understood? A crown can be a map of the cosmos, woven from gold and jade. On the Korean peninsula, the ancient Silla kingdom built mountains for their dead, creating a landscape of power that still dominates the city of Jeonju. These are not simple graves, but colossal, grassy mounds, some over 20 meters high, like sleeping giants on the horizon. Beneath these immense earthen and stone pyramids lay wooden burial chambers, built like subterranean houses for the elite. One of the most famous is the Chunmachong, or Tomb of the Heavenly Horse, excavated in 1973. Inside, archaeologists found a stunning array of treasures, but one object captured the spirit of Silla like no other. Resting near the body was a painting on a birch bark saddle flap known as the Chunmado. It depicts a white horse, wings outlined in red, soaring through a sky dotted with clouds and stars. This is no ordinary steed. It is a divine creature, a celestial messenger capable of carrying a king's soul to the heavens. It is a breathtaking rarity, one of the only surviving paintings from the Silla period, and it reveals a worldview where the boundary between earth and sky was traversed by myth. The true glory of these tombs, however, is worn on the head. The gold crowns of Silla are masterpieces of spiritual engineering. They are not solid circlets, but intricate openwork structures of sheet gold, rising in branching forms that resemble trees or antlers. From these delicate golden branches dangled dozens of shimmering pendants, curved pieces of jade known as gogok, and tiny gold discs that would have trembled and caught the light with every movement. The effect is one of both immense weight and ethereal lightness. The symbolism is profound. The tree motifs connect the wearer to the world tree of shamanistic belief, a cosmic axis linking the underworld, earth, and heaven. The jade gogok, shaped like crescent moons or claws, were ancient symbols of fertility and spiritual power dating back to Korea's Bronze Age. This was a crown designed for a priest-king, a ruler whose authority was as much about mediating with the spirit world as it was about governing the human one. The wealth that produced these objects was legendary. Historical records from China describe Silla as the country of gold, and the tombs offer irrefutable proof. Alongside crowns, excavators found gold belts, earrings, bracelets, and exquisite vessels. This gold funded and reflected a kingdom at a cultural crossroads. Early Silla burial practices were deeply shamanistic, focused on equipping the soul for a journey and displaying earthly rank to ensure status in the next life. Later, as Buddhism took hold from the 6th century onward, the tomb goods began to change, incorporating Buddhist symbols and scriptures. Yet the mound-building tradition persisted, a powerful fusion of indigenous belief and imported faith. To stand before these great grassy hills is to witness the physical manifestation of a kingdom's confidence, its gold literally woven into the landscape. They buried their kings with wings in the form of a painted horse and with entire forests of gold, ensuring their journey was not an end but an ascent. The intimacy of the Silla crown spoke of a journey to the heavens, but in the rolling hills of central Italy, another couple chose to face eternity not with gold but with a quiet, domestic grace. From the ancient Etruscan city of Carrare, now Servitory, comes one of the most human and revealing artifacts ever pulled from the earth, the sarcophagus of the spouses. Carved from terracotta in the 6th century before the Common Era, it is not a somber coffin, but a life-sized portrait of a husband and wife reclining together on a banquet couch, as if sharing a final, private moment. They are propped up on their elbows, their bodies relaxed and close. The man's arm is draped gently around the woman's shoulders, and their faces are turned toward each other, wearing the faint, enigmatic smiles known as the archaic smile. They hold objects in their hands, perhaps small perfume flasks or eggs, symbols of life and fragrance for the journey ahead. This is not a monument to solitary power or martial glory. It is a celebration of partnership, of shared life, and of a companionship that was meant to continue beyond death. For centuries, our view of the Etruscans was filtered through the writings of their conquerors, the Romans. Roman historians painted them as a people of excessive luxury and moral laxity, where women were dangerously liberated and banquets were scenes of scandalous indulgence. The Romans, with their stricter patriarchal norms, viewed Etruscan social customs with suspicion and disdain. But this sarcophagus and others like it tells a different story entirely. The very fact that the wife is depicted as the same size as her husband, sharing the same couch of honor, is revolutionary for its time. In contemporary Greek art, women were often shown as smaller, subordinate figures. Here, she is his equal, physically and socially present in a scene of high-status banqueting, which was a central ritual in Etruscan public and religious life. This artistic choice reflects a profound social reality. Etruscan women, unlike their Greek or later Roman counterparts, retained their own names and held significant property rights. They actively participated in public festivals, attended games and theatrical performances, and dined alongside men, not segregated in separate quarters. The banquet itself was not merely a private dinner. It was a key social and political event where alliances were forged and status was displayed. By placing his wife beside him in this eternal banquet, the man was making a public declaration. Her status was integral to his own identity and their family's standing. Her presence in this funerary art guaranteed her a place of honor in the afterlife, suggesting a belief that the social bonds of marriage persisted in the next world. The sarcophagus, now housed in the Villa Giulia Museum in Rome, thus becomes a powerful corrective to history written by the victors. It is not a relic of decadence, but one of sophistication. It reveals a society that, while certainly wealthy and fond of life's pleasures, possessed a more egalitarian view of gender roles than the civilizations that would later eclipse it. The tender pose, the mutual gaze, the shared couch, all speak of a culture that valued the conjugal bond as a cornerstone of both earthly life and eternal rest. In their silent terracotta dialogue, this Etruscan couple asks us to question the narratives we inherit. What other truths about lost civilizations have been buried not by time, but by the prejudices of those who wrote their epitaphs? The terracotta couple of Carrège shared a quiet eternity, but in the fractured world of the 11th century before the Common Era, a warrior found his rest alone, far from home, with a secret etched in clay. At the site of Tel Dan in northern Israel, archaeologists uncovered the grave of an elite fighter from around 1100 BC. His bones told a story of a violent age, but a single broken piece of pottery buried with him would whisper a name that had echoed only in legend. The warrior himself was an anomaly. He was buried with a type of bronze helmet never before seen in the region, a design with a tall, crested crown and cheek guards that scholars immediately recognized. It was a helmet of the Aegean world, identical to those worn by the warriors depicted on the pottery and frescoes of the Mycenaean Greeks, and by the mysterious raiders known to history as the Sea Peoples. These were the marauders Egyptian records describe as sweeping across the eastern Mediterranean in great waves, contributing to the catastrophic collapse of the Hittite Empire and nearly bringing down Egypt itself. This man, buried in the highlands of Canaan, was likely one of them, a mercenary or a settler who found employment or his end in the service of a local Canaanite or early Israelite king. His presence is a tangible piece of a puzzle, placing a face and a helmet to the chaotic migrations that reshaped the ancient world. But the true astonishment lay not with his armor, but with a humble potsherd, a fragment of a victory stele, reused as a patch in a later wall. On it was an inscription in early Aramaic, a royal proclamation celebrating a king's victory over his enemies. The text boasts of defeating the king of Israel and, most stunningly, the king of the house of David. This tiny, broken piece of ceramic is the earliest known reference to King David outside the Bible, written within a century of his presumed reign. It is not proof of the biblical narratives in their entirety, but it is seismic evidence that by the 9th century BC, a royal dynasty identified by the name David was a recognized political entity in the region. The convergence of these two finds in one location is electrifying. Here lies a warrior from the distant Aegean, a participant in the great civilizational unraveling, buried in the very land where new kingdoms, including David's Judah, were struggling to be born from the ashes. His helmet is a relic of the world that ended, the Bronze Age empires shattered by fire and movement. The inscribed sherd is a birth certificate for the world that followed, the age of smaller, feuding Iron Age kingdoms like Israel and Judah that would eventually produce the biblical text. This one burial ground at Tel Dan acts as a hinge between two epochs. The warrior's grave provides silent, physical testimony to the international chaos of the period, a time of displaced soldiers and shifting allegories. The sherd provides the first hard, archaeological anchor for a figure who had lived only in scripture and song. Together, they transform a shadowy biblical era from mythic prehistory into a documented, gritty, and politically complex historical moment. It forces us to see David not as a purely legendary shepherd king, but as the founder of a real dynasty in a real, dangerous world, a world where a man from across the sea could fight and die under a foreign sun, his helmet glinting beside a fragment of stone that would one day testify to the birth of a nation. While a single warrior's helmet testified to a world in flux, an entire dynasty of kings built monuments to a power that had already been realized south of Egypt in the sun-baked land of modern Sudan. The royal cemetery at El Karu holds the bones of pharaohs who turned history on its head. These are not Egyptian rulers, but the kings of Kush, the powerful Nubian kingdom that rose from the banks of the Nile's great southern bend. Their tombs are pyramids, not the smooth-sided giants of Giza, but smaller, steeper structures with a stark, elegant profile that would come to define the Nubian landscape for centuries. The most famous occupants of El Kuru are the pharaohs of the 25th dynasty, men with names like Pi and his successor Taharqa. Their story is one of astonishing reversal. In the 8th century before the Common Era, Egypt was weak, fractured into squabbling city-states. From the south, Pi, the devout Kushite king, marched north with an army. He saw not a foreign land to plunder, but a spiritual homeland in chaos. He conquered Egypt not as a foreign invader, but as a pious restorer, claiming the throne to reunite the two lands under what he believed was the proper, ancient worship of the god Ammon. For nearly a century, the Kushite pharaohs ruled a unified Egypt and Nubia, the first and only time in history the Nile Valley was governed from the south. Their pyramids at El Kuru are the ultimate symbol of this conquest, a deliberate appropriation of the most iconic Egyptian royal symbol, but they were not mere copycats. They made the form their own, building in local stone with a distinctive, aggressive slope. The tombs themselves were lavishly decorated with Egyptian-style wall paintings and hieroglyphs, showing the Kushite kings making offerings to Osiris and Ammon, seamlessly inserting themselves into the divine lineage of pharaohs. Yet one burial practice at El Kuru is uniquely, breathtakingly Kushite. In a row of graves beside the royal pyramids, archaeologists found the remains of horses. These were not simply slaughtered animals. They were interred with full honors, standing upright in their own burial pits, adorned with the most exquisite trappings. Their heads were covered in beaded nets of faience and silver, their bodies draped with blankets decorated with bronze and silver plaques. These horses were the elite engines of Kushite power. The kingdom's military might was built on cavalry and chariots, a formidable force that gave them a decisive edge over their northern neighbors. To bury a king's favorite war horses beside him was to ensure his mobility and martial prestige continued into the afterlife. It was a statement of identity, declaring that even as they adopted the title of pharaoh and the pyramid tomb, their strength remained rooted in the Nubian mastery of the horse. The tombs of El Kuru are a complex dialogue in stone and bone. They speak of a deep cultural absorption where Kushite rulers so admired Egyptian civilization that they wrapped themselves in its art, religion, and architecture. But they also speak of confident innovation, of a powerful African kingdom that took what it needed from the north, fused it with its own unparalleled traditions, and then used that combined strength to conquer the very source of its inspiration. These pyramids are not outposts of Egypt in a foreign land. They are the headquarters of an empire that looked north and saw not a master, but a territory to be reclaimed and ruled. Her woven textiles might have told stories of the spirit world, but in another Peruvian tomb, a single body told a story that rewrote our understanding of identity itself. In 2012, on a dry hillside at the site of El Castillo de Huami, Polish and Peruvian archaeologists made a discovery that would stun the world of Andean archaeology. They uncovered a massive imperial mausoleum of the Wari civilization, the powerful empire that dominated the Andes centuries before the Inca. Inside a sealed, multi-chambered tomb, they found the remains of 58 noblewomen, buried with exquisite jewelry, precious offerings, and the tools of their high-status craft. This was a royal resting place for an elite sisterhood, a testament to the power of women in Wari society. But among these queens and priestesses, one individual stood out for a profoundly different reason. She was buried in a unique position, face down, her body carefully arranged. Beside her were the tools of a master weaver, including a backstrap loom and fine needles, signaling her immense skill and importance. For years, she was known simply as the weaving priestess. Then, scientific analysis revealed a truth that had been hidden in her bones for over 1,000 years. A detailed skeletal examination and genetic testing showed that this individual, biologically, was male. More specifically, she had a condition known as androgen insensitivity syndrome, which meant her body developed along a female physical path despite having male chromosomes. The archaeologists had discovered what some now call the tomb of the bearded lady. This was not a case of a man disguised as a woman. The burial context is unequivocal. She was interred with the highest honors, surrounded by other elite women, and accompanied by the sacred tools of textile production, one of the most revered and politically powerful activities in the Andes. Her face-down position was not a sign of disrespect, but a known wary funerary practice for individuals of special spiritual status. The community that buried her clearly saw her, treated her, and honored her as a woman. This discovery forces a breathtaking confrontation between ancient perception and modern biology. For the wary, an individual's social role, their skill, and their spiritual contribution seemingly mattered far more than a strict binary of biological sex. The respectful, high-status nature of this burial strongly suggests that the wary culture may have recognized a third gender role, a category for individuals who embodied a blend of traits or who transitioned socially. This person was not an outcast, but a valued and integral member of the imperial elite, a master of a sacred art. It challenges the assumption that non-binary or transgender identities are purely modern social constructs. Here, in the heart of a pre-Columbian empire, we see a society that could accommodate and celebrate a natural variation of human biology within its highest social and religious echelons. This weaver's tomb asks us a humbling question about the past and about ourselves. How many other histories have we simplified or erased because we viewed ancient cultures through the narrow lens of our own rigid categories? Her silent, face-down burial speaks louder than any proclamation, telling us that identity, in some times and places, was woven from a far more complex and beautiful thread. A mummy's silent scream can echo louder than any tomb inscription. Among the serene, idealized faces of Egyptian royalty, a handful of corpses defy the peaceful afterlife with mouths agape and features twisted in apparent agony. These are the so-called screaming mummies, and they offer a chilling counterpoint to the orderly process of mummification. Two of the most famous were found at Deir el-Bahri. One, a woman, lies with her head thrown back, her jaw locked open in a final, silent wail. Another, a man, bears a similar rictus of pain, his body contorted. For decades, these visages fueled speculation about curses, live burial, and divine punishment. Science, however, provides more grounded, though no less fascinating, explanations. The primary culprit is often a simple failure of the embalming process. The key to a peaceful, preserved face was the timely removal of the brain and internal organs, followed by packing the body with natron salt to dehydrate it. If this process was delayed, or if the embalmers neglected to pack the mouth and properly tie the jaw shut, the muscles of the face could contract as they dried, pulling the jaw open into a permanent scream. A body that died in a position of extreme stress or pain could also simply stiffen that way, its pose fossilized by the wrappings. Yet for one particular screaming man, a darker, more deliberate story emerged. This mummy, found in a cache of royal remains and dubbed Unknown Man E, was buried in extraordinary disgrace. He was not placed in a coffin, but wrapped in a ritually impure sheepskin, a substance considered abhorrent to the Egyptians. His hands and feet were bound, and his body was simply dumped in an undecorated box. Forensic analysis suggested he was a young man who died by poisoning or suffocation. The evidence pointed compellingly to a specific historical figure, Prince Pentuer, who was implicated in the harem conspiracy to assassinate the great pharaoh Ramses III. Ancient judicial papyri detail the trial and punishments for the conspirators. While most were executed, Prince Pentuer, being of royal blood, was granted a different fate. The records state he was allowed to take his own life. The theory is that he was forced to drink poison, and his subsequent burial was a deliberate act of posthumous punishment. He was denied the sacred rites of mummification, his body hastily treated and buried with the marks of a traitor, ensuring his soul would not find peace in the afterlife. His screaming face then becomes a political statement, a permanent monument to his disgrace, frozen by both chemical process and royal vengeance. This transforms the mummy from a medical curiosity into a judicial document, a corpse that was not merely prepared for eternity but sentenced to it. It asks us what is more terrifying, a death of accidental agony or a death designed to ensure your suffering never, ever ends. The dagger was a warrior's tool, but the jar beside it held a different kind of offering. In the ancient Canaanite city of Tel Kabri, within a lavish palace complex, archaeologists uncovered a tomb dating back nearly 4,000 years to the early Middle Bronze Age. The burial was a family affair containing the remains of several individuals, but the grave goods told a story that went far beyond simple commemoration. Alongside one of the bodies lay a bronze dagger, a symbol of status and protection, but the true narrative was sealed in the ceramic vessels scattered around the chamber. Among them was a large jar, its interior stained with a dark residue. When scientists subjected that residue to rigorous chemical analysis, the results were astonishing. They detected the unmistakable signatures of tartaric acid, a compound found abundantly in grapes. This was wine, but the analysis went deeper, revealing traces of other organic compounds. Mixed into that ancient vintage were hints of honey for sweetness, mint for a refreshing aroma, and resin from the cedar tree, likely used as a preservative and to impart a distinctive pine-like flavor. This is the earliest chemical evidence ever found of spiced, compounded wine, a sophisticated recipe crafted not for daily consumption but for a sacred farewell. This discovery transforms a simple storage jar into a portal to a funerary feast. The presence of the wine, alongside the dagger and the bones of a sacrificed donkey found at the tomb's entrance, paints a vivid scene of a community gathering to honor their dead. In the early second millennium before the Common Era, wine was not a common commodity. Its production was labor-intensive, and its consumption was deeply ritualized, reserved for elites and special occasions. To include such a precious, specially prepared beverage in a tomb was a profound act. It suggests the mourners believed the deceased would need sustenance for the journey ahead, or perhaps that sharing a final drink with the departed helped cement social bonds among the living, reaffirming family lineage and communal identity in the face of loss. The specific recipe is revelatory. The honey, mint, and cedar were not random additions. Each ingredient likely carried symbolic weight, perhaps intended to sweeten the passage to the afterlife, freshen the spirit, or protect it with the enduring, sacred nature of the cedar tree. This was a crafted sensory experience, meant to engage smell and taste in the ritual, bridging the gap between the living world of feasts and the unknown realm of the dead. The tomb of the first wine, therefore, gives us more than a culinary footnote. It provides a direct chemical witness to the birth of ritual hospitality. It shows us that even 4,000 years ago, death was not a solitary frontier. It was a threshold crossed with ceremony, with shared flavor, and with a communal cup that linked the past, the present, and the hoped-for future in a single, fragrant draught. What other forgotten recipes for eternity are still sealed in the clay, waiting for science to taste the ghost of a feast that sent a soul on its way? A brick forced between the jaws of the dead speaks of a terror more palpable than any curse. In 2006, on the Venetian island of Lazaretto Nuovo, archaeologists excavating a mass grave from a 16th century plague outbreak found a skeleton that stood apart. It was the body of a woman around 60 years old, but someone had taken extraordinary measures with her after death. Jammed violently into her mouth was a single large brick. This was not an accidental collapse of the grave. The stone was intentionally inserted, a deliberate act of post-mortem restraint performed by her own community. This woman is known as the Vampire of Venice, and her burial is a stark archaeological snapshot of a world gripped by a fear that transcended death itself. The practice is known as a vampire burial, but it targets a very specific and chilling folkloric entity, the Nachdaira or Shroud Eater. Medieval and Renaissance communities across Europe believed that during times of rampant plague, certain individuals would not rest peacefully. Instead, they would become Nachdairas. In the grave, these corpses were thought to chew on their own burial shrouds or even their limbs. This grotesque act was not just a desecration, it was a metaphysical contagion. As the Shroud Eater consumed its funerary cloth, it was believed to magically drain the life force from its living relatives, causing them to sicken and die, perpetuating the epidemic from beyond the grave. The brick in the mouth was a brutal, logical solution. It was a gag. By preventing the corpse from physically being able to chew, the living hoped to break the supernatural link that was killing them. It was a defensive act born of utter desperation and profound grief. Other anti-vampire measures found across Europe include staking the body through the heart, binding the limbs, decapitation, and placing the head between the legs or weighing the body down with stones. Each method was designed to immobilize, silence, or destroy the corpse's ability to interact with the world of the living. The Venetian woman's burial connects a biological catastrophe to a spiritual one. When medicine failed, when prayers seemed unanswered, and when death arrived in relentless, incomprehensible waves, people sought a reason. The idea that the plague was spread not just by miasma or rats, but by a malicious, animated corpse within the community gave the terror a face. It offered a target for their rage and fear. By identifying a possible Nachdaira, often an outsider, the first to die in a household or someone with a physical abnormality, and taking drastic action against the body, they believed they could actively fight the epidemic. This transforms the brick from a mere stone into a heartbreaking artifact of trauma. It tells us that in the face of an invisible, unstoppable disease, the human mind will make the enemy visible, even if it has to look into the face of a neighbor, a mother, or a grandmother and see a monster. The silent scream of the mummified traitor was a punishment from the state. The gagged mouth of the Venetian woman was a plea from the terrified living. A final, desperate attempt to build a wall between their world and a horror they believed was climbing out of the earth to consume them. Their bones were not just buried together, they were woven into a single, silent sentence. In 2007, near the northern Italian town of Mantua, archaeologists uncovered a grave that stopped time. It was a simple pit from the Neolithic era, about 6,000 years old, but inside lay a scene of heartbreaking intimacy. A young man and a young woman, both around 20 years old, were buried side by side on their sides, facing one another. Their legs were bent, their arms were wrapped around each other's bodies, and their foreheads were nearly touching. They were locked in an eternal embrace, as if they had simply fallen asleep in each other's arms. This is the tomb of the lovers of Valdaro, and it is one of the most emotionally direct encounters we have with the deep human past. The care taken in their burial is evident. They were not haphazardly thrown into the ground. Their position was deliberate, their bodies arranged with a tenderness that transcends the millennia. Buried with them were 4 flint tools, a blade, and 2 arrowheads, simple possessions for a journey they would make together. For a moment, looking at them, archaeology with all its science falls away, and we are left with a pure human story. The immediate, visceral interpretation is one of profound love and devotion, a couple who could not bear to be parted even in death. Perhaps one died and the other chose to follow, a ritual suicide to remain united. Or perhaps they died together in a sudden tragedy, a rockslide, a flood, or an attack, and were buried by a community that honored their bond. This narrative has captivated the public imagination, turning these 2 skeletons into global symbols of timeless romance. Yet, archaeologists must ask harder questions. Could this be evidence of a ritual sacrifice? Some cultures practice the killing of a servant or spouse to accompany a person of status into the afterlife. The simultaneous nature of their deaths, suggested by their intertwined pose, raises this grim possibility. However, there is no sign of violent trauma on their bones, no clear evidence of a killing blow. Another, more clinical possibility is that their bodies were arranged in this pose after death, a funerary practice meant to symbolize unity and connection for the community left behind, rather than a reflection of their actual dying moments. Even if this were the case, the meaning remains powerful. A society that took the time to position two bodies in such a tender, complex embrace was making a profound statement about the bonds that tie people together. It tells us that 6,000 years ago, at the dawn of agriculture and settled life, human relationships were already recognized as the core of existence, worthy of being commemorated in the most poignant way imaginable. The flint tools suggest they were people of their time, hunters or farmers, but their burial suggests they were something more universal. They are a mirror. We look at them and we do not see primitive ancestors. We see ourselves, our own fears of loss, and our own hopes for a love that endures beyond the final breath. Whether they were lovers, siblings, or close companions, their silent embrace asks us the most enduring question of all. What is the shape of a bond so strong that not even the earth, given 6,000 years, could pull it apart? Deep within the jungles of Belize, the entrance to Astonishing does not look like a temple. It is a gaping maw in a limestone cliff, a dark pool of water leading into absolute blackness. To reach the sacred chambers, you must swim into that cold water, wade through subterranean rivers, and climb over ancient boulders, a journey that feels less like an excavation and more like a descent. This cave, known as ATM, was not a place for the living. For the ancient Maya, it was a direct portal to Xibalba, the feared and watery underworld, a place where gods and ancestors dwelled. And deep in its heart, in a chamber they called the cathedral, they left an offering that time transformed into something unearthly. Here, on the cave floor, lies the complete skeleton of a teenage girl. She was placed here over 1,000 years ago, likely as a sacrifice to Chok, the capricious rain god. But the cave's environment has worked a slow magic on her bones. Over centuries, mineral-rich water dripping from the stalactites above has coated her skeleton in a layer of sparkling calcite crystals. Today, when archaeologists' headlamps pass over her, she glitters like a constellation fallen to the cave floor. They call her the Crystal Maiden. Her pose is one of tragic repose, suggesting she was placed with care, perhaps already deceased from a ritual act meant to plead for rain or favor from the lords of Xibalba. She was not alone in this stone womb. The cave is a cluttered ossuary of ritual. All around her are the remains of others, at least 13 more individuals, and the artifacts of desperate communion. Whole pottery vessels called ollas sit where they were left, some still containing the residue of offerings like maize or cacao. There are stone tools and ritual blades. One of the most famous objects is the monkey pot, a ceramic vessel with a sculpted face of a primate, its expression caught between human and beast. These were not casual discards. Each pot, each bone, represents a specific pilgrimage, a journey into the terrifying belly of the earth to negotiate with powers that controlled life and death. The Maya believed caves were the literal entrances to the underworld, the source of water, fertility, and ancestral wisdom, but also of disease and death. To venture here was to perform the ultimate act of piety and courage. The glittering bones of the Crystal Maiden are not merely a scientific specimen. They are a frozen moment of that dialogue. She represents the human cost of that belief, a life offered in a place of profound darkness, transformed by the very geology of the underworld into a permanent, shining relic. Her silent, crystalline form asks us what we would be willing to give and where we would be willing to go if we believed our survival depended on a message carried into the absolute dark. High above the cloud line, where the air grows thin and the condors circle, a lake of startling blue holds a secret in its cliffs. In 1997, looters searching for Inca gold near Laguna de los Condors, the Lake of the Condors, scaled a sheer rock face and found something far more valuable to history. They breached a series of small stone tombs built into the cliffside, and inside they found not loose treasure but people. Over 200 mummy bundles, carefully wrapped and seated, stared back at them from the darkness. This was the necropolis of the Chachapoya, the Cloud People, a culture that thrived in these impossibly steep, mist-shrouded valleys of northern Peru centuries before the Inca arrived. The looters, in their haste, damaged some of the bundles, but archaeologists soon secured the site, beginning a monumental rescue operation. Each bundle had to be carefully lowered by rope down the 300-foot cliff, a delicate ballet against gravity to save a legacy suspended between earth and sky. The mummies themselves were astonishingly well preserved, thanks to the cool, dry microclimate of the sealed tombs, but it was their wrappings that told the richest story. The Chachapoya were legendary weavers, and the textiles enclosing these ancestors were vibrant masterpieces. Men, women, and children were each dressed in their finest tunics and cloaks, woven with intricate geometric patterns and bold colors of crimson, gold, and blue. Some wore feathered headdresses, others had carved bone ornaments. The bodies were placed in a flexed, seated position, knees drawn to chest, and then meticulously wrapped in layers of these beautiful cloths, creating a large, human-shaped parcel. This was not a hiding of the dead, but a presentation, a final, proud statement of identity and social standing bundled for eternity. Within the layers, archaeologists found the tools of daily and spiritual life. There were pottery vessels, weapons, and food offerings like maize and beans. But one type of artifact was particularly revealing, clusters of knotted cords called quippers. The Inca are famous for using these complex textile devices for record keeping, a system of knots and colors that encoded census data, tributes, and narratives. Finding quippers in a Chachapoya tomb was a revelation. It proved this technology was not an Inca invention, but one they adopted and spread from cultures like this one. For the Cloud People, these knots may have recorded lineage, stories, or the very biography of the person they accompanied, a personal history encoded in string placed in their arms for the journey. The physical remains of the people themselves added another layer. Studies of their bones revealed bodies adapted over generations to the high-altitude environment. They had barreled chests and robust skeletons, evolutionary adjustments for extracting oxygen from thin air. Yet many also showed signs of violence, healed fractures, and head wounds, a testament to a life in a rugged, competitive landscape. This remote cliff became their final fortress for a reason. The Chachapoya were fierce warriors known for their resistance. They were eventually conquered by the expanding Inca Empire in the late 15th century, and then, a few decades later, both cultures were overrun by Spanish conquistadors and the diseases they brought. In the chaos of conquest and epidemic that swept through accessible valleys, this secluded necropolis was forgotten. By being placed literally out of reach, these bundles escaped the systematic destruction of indigenous tombs and temples that followed the Spanish arrival. The Lake of the Condors, therefore, did more than preserve bodies. It preserved a cultural snapshot in suspended animation, a library of fabric and bone that survived precisely because it was hidden in the clouds. It safeguards the legacy of a proud people not in grand conquered cities, but in the intimate, bundled forms of their ancestors, still watching over the water, their stories knotted tight, waiting for a time when they could be lowered gently back into the light of history. What other memories of lost civilizations are still tucked away in the world's forgotten ledges, kept safe by their very inaccessibility? The cliffside tombs of the Cloud People preserved identity in woven cloth, but in a cave halfway across the world, a handful of ancient pollen would preserve a radical idea about what it means to be human. In 1960, within the vast, echoing chamber of Shanidar Cave in the Zagros Mountains of Iraq, archaeologist Ralph Solke uncovered a series of Neanderthal skeletons. One of them, an adult male catalogued as Shanidar IV, was found lying on his side in a shallow pit. The position itself suggested careful placement, but it was the soil sample taken from around the body that would send shockwaves through our understanding of prehistory. When paleobotanist Arlette Leroy-Gerhan analyzed that dirt years later, she found something astonishing. It was packed with clumps of pollen from specific flowering plants. This was not a random scattering of wind-blown dust. The pollen came from medicinally potent and vividly colorful species like hollyhock, cornflower, groundsel, and yarrow. These were plants known for their healing properties, their bright blooms, or their strong scents. The implication was beautiful and profound. Someone, tens of thousands of years ago, had gathered these flowers and deliberately placed them around the body of this Neanderthal man. This was the flower burial, and it shattered a century-old stereotype. For decades, Neanderthals had been portrayed in popular culture, and even some scientific circles, as brutish, grunting subhumans, hunched and animalistic, incapable of complex emotion or thought. The pollen from Shanidar Cave painted a starkly different picture. Here was evidence of tenderness, of ritual, of an act that served no practical survival purpose. It suggested empathy, a care for the dead that extended beyond the living community. It hinted at symbolic thought, the use of flowers perhaps to honor, to heal symbolically, or to prepare the individual for an afterlife we can only guess at. This was a flower power moment in paleoanthropology, forcing a fundamental reevaluation. If Neanderthals buried their dead with ceremony and meaning, then they possessed a rich inner life, a culture, a capacity for grief and reverence that brought them startlingly close to our own species. The discovery suggested the roots of spirituality and compassion were far older and more deeply shared than anyone had dared to imagine. However, as with all great discoveries, later scrutiny introduced complexity. Some scientists proposed an alternative explanation. Could the pollen have been introduced by burrowing rodents like the Persian jerd, which is known to store seeds and flowers in its underground nest? This natural process could, theoretically, have concentrated the pollen near the skeleton long after the burial. The debate continues, a healthy scientific dialogue that examines every assumption. Yet, even with this caveat, the Shanidar burial remains powerfully evocative. The sheer quantity and specific selection of pollen is difficult to dismiss entirely. Whether placed by mourning kin or gathered by industrious rodents, the flowers were there, woven into the earth with the bones. Their silent presence after all this time continues to ask the most haunting question of all. When did we first look upon the still face of a companion, feel the ache of their absence, and reach for something beautiful from the living world to say the things for which we had no words? The pollen of Shanidar Cave suggests a capacity for care, but another grave seemed to hold proof of something else entirely, a being of impossible scale. In 1890, during excavations at the Bronze Age tumulus of Castil, now Lelez in southern France, anthropologist Georges Vacher de Lapouge made a startling claim. He reported finding fragments of human bone so massive that, when he attempted a reconstruction, they pointed to an individual of staggering proportions. The dimensions of the recovered femur, tibia, and humerus were, according to his calculations, from a person who would have stood over 3.5 meters tall, well over 11 feet. This was not just a tall person, this was, by any modern standard, a giant. The discovery, dubbed the Giant of Castelnau, ignited immediate controversy and fascination. The bones themselves were real, but their interpretation became a battleground. In an era when archaeology was still young and the boundaries between science and spectacle were often blurred, the find was a sensation. It seemed to give tangible, skeletal proof to the giants that populated local folklore and ancient myths across cultures, from the biblical Nephilim to the Titans of Greek legend. Here, perhaps, was a relic of a forgotten race of colossal beings. Then, the evidence vanished. The bones themselves were lost, likely misplaced or destroyed in the intervening decades, leaving only de Lapouge's published measurements and sketches. This disappearance transformed the giant of Castelnau from a scientific puzzle into a permanent mystery, its truth now entirely dependent on the credibility of a single 19th century report. Without the original bones to re-examine with modern techniques, the debate has fractured into two irreconcilable camps. On one side are those who take the measurements at face value, seeing Castelnau as proof of ancient giants, a narrative enthusiastically embraced by certain alternative history circles. For them, it is a key piece of suppressed evidence, pointing to a lost chapter of human history deliberately ignored by mainstream academia. On the other side, skeptics and mainstream scientists offer more grounded, if less sensational, explanations. The most likely is a simple case of mistaken assembly. In a communal tomb disturbed over millennia, it is entirely possible that de Lapouge mistakenly pieced together bones from several different large individuals, creating a composite skeleton of impossible height. Another strong possibility is pathological gigantism, a condition caused by a pituitary tumor that leads to excessive growth hormone production. Historical figures like Robert Wadlow, who reached 2.7 meters in the 20th century, prove that such extreme stature, while incredibly rare, is biologically possible. A Bronze Age individual with this condition would have been seen as a marvel, a demigod, and would certainly have been buried with honor, their unusual bones preserved. The story of the giant of Castelnau lives on precisely because the evidence is lost. It exists in the liminal space between fact and folklore, a ghost in the archaeological record. It demonstrates how a single, poorly documented find can escape the confines of a scientific report and take on a life of its own in the popular imagination, fueled by our enduring fascination with the superhuman and the unexplained. It asks a subtle but important question about how we build our past. Do we trust the measurement when we cannot touch the bone? And what does that trust, or lack of it, say about the stories we are willing to believe? The Druids of ancient Britain have always been ghosts in the historical record. We know of them only through the writings of their enemies, the Romans, who described them as the intellectual and spiritual elite of Celtic society, philosophers, judges, and priests who memorized vast amounts of sacred lore and presided over rituals in sacred groves. But for centuries, not a single artifact could be definitively linked to a Druid. They were whispers in the texts, figures of legend without a face. Then, in 2008, in a quiet field near Colchester, a grave was opened that seemed to give those whispers a body. The burial dated to the decades just before the Roman invasion of 43 Common Era, a time of profound change. The person within was a man in his 40s, and he was not laid to rest with weapons or the trappings of a warrior. His grave goods were a puzzle of intellect and ritual. There was a set of fine iron surgical instruments, including a sharp hook, a probe, and a scalpel, tools that spoke of a healer's hand, someone who understood the body. Beside these lay a board game, its pieces carefully arranged. This was not a child's toy, but a complex strategy game, likely used for both entertainment and the teaching of tactical thinking. But the most enigmatic objects were a collection of 8 long, thin metal rods along with a series of metal rings. These were unlike any typical tool or weapon. Archaeologists studying them proposed a fascinating theory. These rods and rings were a divination set. The practice of sortilege or casting lots was a known druidic art for seeking guidance from the gods or predicting the future. The rods could have been thrown like dice, their patterns interpreted, or the rings could have been spun on them, their movements read as omens. Here, in one carefully arranged grave, was the toolkit of a complete intellectual. The medical instruments for healing the physical body, the board game for sharpening the strategic mind, and the divination set for communing with the spiritual world. This triad perfectly mirrors the Roman descriptions of the Druids as the keepers of all knowledge. This man was not a specialist. He was a generalist of the highest order, a philosopher priest who moved between the realms of science, gamesmanship, and the sacred. The Colchester burial provides our first tangible link to that lost learned class. He was buried at the very edge of the Roman world, just as that world was about to crash upon his shores. His grave is a time capsule of indigenous British spirituality and intellect, frozen at the moment before conquest would forever alter its practice. He offers a profound correction to the popular image of the Druid as merely a wild-haired mystic chanting in a forest. This was a scholar, a man whose authority was derived from knowledge, from skill, and from his perceived ability to navigate the unseen currents of fate. His silent grave asks us, what does a society lose when it conquers not just land, but the very minds that held its memory and interpreted its gods? The warrior's journey did not end on the battlefield, but in the sacred heart of an empire. In the shadow of the Templo Mayor, the Great Pyramid at the center of Tenochtitlan, now buried beneath modern Mexico City, archaeologists uncovered a tomb that gave flesh and bone to the Aztec ideal of a sacred soldier. He was a young man laid to rest in a stone-lined cist, but he was not alone. Curled beside him, its head resting near his own, was the complete skeleton of a wolf. This was no mere offering of meat or hide. The wolf was dressed for a celestial audience. Adorning its ears were delicate golden ornaments, and around its waist was a precious belt of Atlantic seashells, materials that spoke of tribute and far-reaching trade networks. This was the burial of an Aztec wolf knight, a Quetzalcoatl, and his spirit guide was prepared for eternity. For the Aztecs, the wolf, or Quetzalcoatl, was far more than an animal. It was a potent symbol of the warrior elite, embodying the perfect fusion of ferocity, cunning, and loyalty. More specifically, the wolf was a sacred avatar of Huitzilopochtli, the patron god of Tenochtitlan, the god of sun and war, and the divine guide who had led the Mexica people to their promised land. To be buried with a wolf was to be placed under the direct protection of this founding deity for the perilous journey ahead. The golden ear spools on the wolf transformed it from a beast into a being of status, a noble companion. The shell belt, likely from the Gulf of Mexico, mirrored the warrior's own regalia, marking them as a paired, high-status unit. This burial is a direct window into the profound Aztec concept of the Nahual. A Nahual was not a pet or a simple symbol, but a spiritual co-essence, an animal counterpart that shared a person's soul and destiny. Powerful individuals, especially warriors and rulers, were believed to have powerful Nahuals. In life, the warrior may have felt a deep kinship with the wolf's attributes, its pack-hunting strategy mirroring the disciplined Aztec military units, its nocturnal prowess echoing the stealth of combat. In death, that spiritual bond became a practical necessity. The Aztec underworld, Mictlan, was a 9-level descent filled with terrifying obstacles, from clashing mountains to rivers of blood. A newly deceased soul needed a guide, a protector with keen senses to navigate that darkness. The wolf, as the companion of the guiding god Huitzilopochtli, was the ultimate psychopomp. This carefully interred animal was not sacrificed, it was enlisted. Its spirit was tasked with leading the young warrior's soul safely through the 9-year journey to its final rest in Mictlan. The tomb of the Wolf Knight, therefore, is more than a grave. It is a frozen moment of spiritual logistics. It shows us that for the Aztecs, a great warrior's duty did not end with his last breath. His final and most important mission began at the moment of burial, and for that, he needed the best companion possible, one dressed in gold and shells, ready to lead the way into the eternal night. What whispered prayers sent them off, trusting that the bond between man and wolf could hold fast against the terrors of a landscape built from fear itself. Gold could also be a canvas for an entire theology, small enough to fit on a finger. From the labyrinthine ruins of the Palace of Knossos on Crete comes the story of an object of breathtaking beauty and enduring mystery, the so-called Ring of Minos. This is not a simple band, but a large, heavy gold signet ring, its oval face engraved with a scene of astonishing complexity and narrative power. According to its controversial provenance, it was discovered in a tomb near the ancient capital, placed there to signify the eternal authority of its royal or priestly owner. The ring's surface is a miniature universe of Minoan belief. At its center, a goddess stands beneath the sacred branches of an olive tree, her arms raised in a gesture of epiphany or blessing. Before her, a female worshipper approaches, while behind, a male figure, perhaps a king or a priest, gestures toward a small, tripartite shrine. Above this central scene, a boat glides across a wavy sea, carrying more figures toward this sacred encounter. Every element is charged with meaning. The goddess under the tree represents the divine presence in nature, a potent force of fertility and protection. The boat journey likely symbolizes the perilous voyage of the soul or a ritual pilgrimage across the waters, connecting the human world with the divine island sanctuary. The shrine architecture mirrors the actual multi-room complexes found at Minoan peak sanctuaries, places where heaven and earth were believed to meet. Scholars see in this dense imagery a possible illustration of the Hieros Gamos, or sacred marriage, a ritual where the king would symbolically unite with the goddess to ensure the land's fertility and the dynasty's right to rule. Alternatively, it may depict an epiphany ritual, the moment the goddess manifests herself to her devotees, granting them her power and favor. This tiny gold circle then becomes a portable scripture. For the Minoans, who left no deciphered written records of their religious texts, art like this is our primary source. The ring suggests that their view of death was intrinsically linked to this cycle of divine encounter and renewal. To be buried with it was to carry a permanent passport to that sacred moment, a guarantee of the deceased's participation in the eternal rituals that sustain the cosmos. Yet, the ring's own history is shrouded in as much mystery as the scene it depicts. Its discovery in the early 20th century was poorly documented, and its authenticity has been fiercely debated for decades. Some experts point to stylistic details that seem too perfect, too comprehensive a summary of Minoan iconography, suggesting it could be a brilliant modern forgery. Others argue it's where patterns and craftsmanship are genuinely ancient. This debate itself is telling. The ring's power is so potent that it has compelled forgers to try and recreate it, and scholars to fight over its truth. Whether a genuine artifact from a tomb or a masterful modern invention, its imagery has become iconic, shaping our very vision of Minoan spirituality. It teaches us that sometimes the most important discoveries are not just about verifying facts, but about the stories we need to believe in order to understand a lost world. What does it mean when an object's symbolic truth becomes so compelling that its physical authenticity almost becomes secondary? A skull can hold the memory of a final, violent moment for 1,000 years. In 2009, in the quiet coastal town of Weymouth in Dorset, England, workers preparing for a new road unearthed a ditch that was not meant for drainage. At the bottom lay a jumble of human bones. As archaeologists carefully excavated, the scale of the find became horrifyingly clear. This was a mass grave containing the remains of 54 young men. But these were not casualties of a battle. Each skeleton was missing its head. The skulls had been tossed haphazardly into the pit alongside and on top of the bodies, a chaotic heap of the dead. Forensic analysis of the bones told a grimly efficient story. These men had been executed. The cut marks on their neck vertebrae were clean, deep, and precise, angled from the front. This was not the hacking of a chaotic melee. This was the work of someone standing before a kneeling or bent-over victim, delivering a powerful, practiced blow with a sharp blade, likely a sword or a heavy axe. Some of the skulls bore additional cuts and chops, suggesting the executioners did not always finish the job with the first strike, or perhaps delivered punitive blows after death. The violence was systematic, a production line of death. Who were these men? Radiocarbon dating placed the grave in the 11th century, a time when the shores of England lived in fear of the dragon-prowed ships from the north. Isotope analysis of the men's teeth provided a shocking clue. These individuals did not grow up eating food from English soil. The chemical signatures in their teeth matched the geology of Scandinavia, with several coming from the region of modern Sweden and others from the Arctic Circle, possibly northern Norway. These were Vikings far from home, but they were not buried with any of the trappings of warriors. No weapons, no jewelry, not a single personal possession was found with them. They had been stripped, killed, and dumped. The historical context of early 11th century England offers two chilling possibilities. The first is that they were a raiding party, perhaps landing on the Dorset coast to plunder, only to be intercepted and captured by local Anglo-Saxon forces. Their execution would have been a public act of deterrence, a warning to other would-be raiders carved into 54 necks. But the timing suggests an even more specific and infamous event. In the year 1002, the weak and paranoid Anglo-Saxon king, Ethelred the Unready, issued a brutal decree known as the St. Brice's Day Massacre. Fearing plots and betrayal from the Danes who had settled in England, he ordered the extermination of all Danish men in his kingdom. The chronicles describe a day of nationwide butchery. Could the Weymouth grave be a physical, archaeological footprint of that royal order? These men may not have been raiders at all, but settlers, farmers, or traders, rounded up and beheaded simply for their origin. The bone evidence tilts the scales. The men were mostly in their late teens and 20s, prime raiding age. Yet the lack of old battle wounds on their skeletons suggests they were not grizzled veterans. They could have been a fresh, inexperienced crew, or indeed civilians caught in a net of ethnic hatred. The grave forces us to witness violence not as a historical abstraction, but as a physical fact. The nicks and grooves on the cervical vertebrae are a precise record of the angle of the sword, the strength of the swing, the split-second intersection of blade and bone. Each cut is a signature of the executioner, a moment of terrible intimacy fossilized in calcium. This pit is not a warrior's tomb, it is a crime scene. It speaks of a time when the sea brought not just trade and exploration, but also a terror that could end in a muddy ditch with the sound of a falling axe and the sight of your own skull tumbling in beside you. What final thoughts, in a language we can no longer hear, passed through those minds in the instant before the world went dark? A ditch for a new road can reveal a crime, but a donkey's stumble can uncover an entire city of the dead. In 1996, a donkey carrying a tourist through Egypt's Bahariya oasis lost its footing, its leg crashing through the crust of the desert floor. What it revealed was not solid rock, but a hole leading down into darkness. When archaeologists investigated, they peered into a subterranean world that took their breath away. They had found the Cave of the Thousand Mummies, a sprawling Roman-era necropolis that may hold the remains of over 10,000 individuals. This was not a tomb for pharaohs, but a vast, multi-chambered apartment complex for the afterlife, built for the prosperous middle-class residents of a remote desert trading hub. The scale is almost impossible to visualize. The necropolis is a honeycomb of family tombs, each consisting of several rooms stacked with mummies, sometimes piled 4 or 5 deep. Walking through the narrow passages, you are surrounded on all sides by the dead, their linen-wrapped forms resting in niches carved from the living rock. The air is thick with the silence of centuries and the faint, sweet scent of ancient resins. But among these countless cloth-wrapped forms, a flash of light would catch your eye. These are the golden mummies, the aristocrats of this democratic city of the dead. They are not covered in solid gold, but in a layer of plaster which was then meticulously painted and gilded. A sheet of gold leaf was applied over the face and sometimes across the chest to represent jewelry and amulets. The effect is stunning. In the flicker of a torch, these faces would have shimmered with a divine, otherworldly light. Yet the true magic is in the portraits, for these are not anonymous golden masks. On the plastered chests of many, artists painted breathtakingly lifelike portraits of the deceased. Using encaustic, a technique mixing pigment with hot base wax, they created faces that feel startlingly immediate. We see a young woman with delicate features and large, thoughtful eyes, her hair styled in intricate Roman curls. A man with a strong jaw and a close-cropped beard gazes out with quiet confidence. These are not idealized gods or symbolic representations. They are individual people captured with a psychological depth that bridges 2,000 years in an instant. You are not looking at a mummy, you are meeting someone's gaze. This fusion of styles is the heart of the discovery. The bodies are mummified, a purely Egyptian religious practice rooted in the belief of physical resurrection. But the portraits, the hairstyles, and the fashionable tunics depicted are distinctly Roman. This is the archaeology of cultural identity in action. The people of Bahariya Oasis in the 1st and 2nd centuries Common Era were living at a vibrant crossroads. Their wealth came from the oasis's prime location on caravan routes, trading wine, dates, and other goods. They adopted the latest Roman fashions and artistic techniques, signaling their connection to the cosmopolitan power of the empire. Yet in death, they clung to the ancient Egyptian rituals that promised eternity. They wanted to be both modern Romans and eternal Egyptians, so they were buried wearing golden plaster like a pharaoh, but with a portrait that showed off their contemporary Roman haircut. The Cave of the Thousand Mummies, therefore, rewrites the narrative of a remote province. It shows us that globalization and cultural blending are not modern inventions. Here, in the middle of the Western Desert, a thriving community used its economic success to buy a hybrid immortality. They invested in the best of both worlds, employing artists skilled in Roman portraiture to execute the most Egyptian of acts, the preservation of the soul. This vast, accidental cemetery is a testament to ordinary people's profound desire to be remembered, not as symbols but as themselves, their faces shining in the dark, forever suspended between the sand of the desert and the style of an empire. What conversations passed between the portrait painter and his subject as they collaborated on this, the only likeness that would ever matter? Her name was Enheduanna, and she was the first author in history whose name we know. While the physical location of her tomb is lost to the shifting sands of Mesopotamia, her voice has survived for over 4,300 years, and it was preserved by the very burial customs we have been exploring. Her immortality came not from gold or jade, but from words inscribed on clay tablets and from a single, breathtaking object found in the sacred precinct of Ur. Archaeologists excavating the Jiparu, the residence of the high priestess of the moon god Nana, uncovered a carved alabaster disc. On one side, it shows a ritual scene, a libation being poured before a temple. But it is the other side that holds the key. There, an inscription identifies the central figure. It reads, Enheduanna, daughter of Sargon of Akkad, high priestess of the god Nana. This is her portrait, a tangible link to a woman who was both a royal princess and the most powerful religious official in the world's first empire. Her father, Sargon, was the legendary conqueror who united the warring city-states of Sumer and Akkad, forging history's first multi-ethnic empire. To bind this new realm together, he installed his daughter as the high priestess of Ur, the spiritual heart of Sumer. This was not a symbolic role. It was a political masterstroke, using religious authority to cement his dynasty's divine right to rule over both the Akkadian north and the Sumerian south. Enheduanna was the living bridge between two cultures, yet she did far more than just preside. She wrote and she signed her work. On dozens of clay tablets, scribes copied her hymns and temple poems. In them, she speaks in the first person with a startlingly personal voice. In her most famous work, The Exaltation of Inanna, she does not just praise the warrior goddess. She pours out her own anguish, describing a time of political rebellion when she was forcibly exiled from Ur. She pleads directly to the goddess for restoration, weaving her personal trauma into the fabric of divine myth. I, the high priestess Enheduanna, she declares, etching her identity into the literary cosmos forever. This act of naming oneself was revolutionary. Before her, texts were anonymous, attributed to gods or to a faceless tradition. Enheduanna claimed authorship. She asserted that an individual human mind, with its unique experiences and emotions, could create works worthy of the gods and vital to the state. Her hymns were not just prayers, they were instruments of imperial policy, designed to unite the empire under a shared pantheon with Inanna, and by extension the Sargonid dynasty at its apex. Her legacy is inextricably tied to the royal cemetery of that same site of the Great Death Pit. While her body is not among those tombs, her spiritual and intellectual presence permeates the sacred ground. The artifacts of give us the gold, the sacrifices, the terrifying scale of ancient power, but Enheduanna gives us its mind. She represents a different kind of treasure unearthed from the grave of time, the discovery of a singular consciousness. In a world memorialized by objects, she left us a voice, one that speaks of politics, faith, exile, and triumph with a clarity that feels utterly modern. She forces us to ask, what is the greater discovery, the golden headdress of a queen, or the first signed poem that tells us what it meant to be that queen, to hold that power and to fear its loss? The seafloor holds more than shipwrecks, it cradles forgotten dreams. In March of 1998, the nets of a Sicilian fishing trawler, the Capitan Sixio, snagged on something impossibly heavy in the Strait of Sicily, over 1,500 feet down. As the winch strained and the crew hauled their catch from the dock, they expected rocks or perhaps a tangled piece of modern debris. What broke the surface was a vision from a lost world. Dripping with seawater and ancient sediment, a magnificent bronze figure emerged, larger than life. It was a satyr, a mythical follower of Dionysus, caught in a wild, ecstatic dance. Though its arms and one leg were missing, torn away by time or the trawler's nets, the power of the sculpture was undeniable. The torso twisted with dynamic energy, the head thrown back in abandon, the pointed ears and wild hair capturing a moment of divine intoxication frozen for 2 millennia. This was the dancing satyr of Mazzara del Vallo, a masterpiece rescued from the abyss by sheer, improbable chance. This was not a burial but a shipwreck, a maritime tomb for cargo. The satyr was likely part of a Roman merchant vessel, sometime between the 1st century before the Common Era and the 2nd century Common Era, carrying looted or commissioned Greek art back to Italy. For the Romans, conquering Greece meant falling in love with its art. They developed an insatiable appetite for original Greek bronzes and marble copies to decorate their villas, their public forums, and most tellingly, their tombs. A statue like this dancing satyr was not merely decoration, it was a direct conduit to a specific spiritual realm. The satyr is a creature of pure Dionysian energy. Dionysus was the god of wine, ecstasy, ritual madness, and the liberation of the soul from societal constraints. His mysteries promised initiates a blessed afterlife, a release from the ordinary into a state of eternal, joyful frenzy. To place an image of a dancing satyr in a tomb or a sanctuary was to invoke that promise. It was an invitation to the god, a plea for the deceased to be welcomed into the divine revelry that never ended. The statue itself is a technical marvel, explaining why it was worth transporting across treacherous seas. Cast using the lost wax method, it stands over 2 meters tall, a testament to the confidence of Greek bronze smiths. The surface, once cleaned of its marine concretion, revealed exquisite details, the careful rendering of musculature, the delicate strands of hair, the tense veins in the feet. This was not mass-produced loot. It was a prized original, likely from the late Hellenistic or early imperial period, embodying the dramatic, emotional style that the Roman elite coveted. Its discovery on the seafloor, rather than in a burial mound, gives us a different kind of truth. It shows the bustling, dangerous commerce in immortality. Roman nobles were not just burying themselves with symbols of Dionysus. They were importing the very vessels of his power, risking storms and pirates to bring these spiritual talismans home. The ship that carried the satyr failed in its mission, sending the god's dancer to a silent, dark palace for centuries. Yet, this accidental preservation in cold, deep water saved it from the fate of so many ancient bronzes which were later melted down for their metal. The sea, often a thief, this time became a perfect saline vault. The dancing satyr, now the centerpiece of a museum in Mazzara del Vallo, embodies a profound cultural transaction. It represents the Roman desire to capture Greek arete or excellence and harness its spiritual potency for their own journey beyond death. They understood that to conquer a culture was not enough, you had to own its dreams of the afterlife. So they filled their tombs with images of Greek gods, heroes, and ecstatic followers like this satyr, hoping to borrow the older civilization's roadmap to eternity. The statue's incomplete state is strangely fitting. We see the radiant joy in the torso and face, but we must imagine the missing arms reaching for an unseen companion, the legs kicking in a step we can almost hear. It is a fragment of a larger celebration, a single recovered note from a symphony played for the dead, reminding us that sometimes the most vivid ghosts from the past are not found in graves, but lost between ports, waiting for a net to find them in the dark. Gold could adorn a priestess, but it could also arm a priest for the most terrifying of sacred duties. In 2008, not far from the royal tombs of Sapon, another discovery was made at the site of Huaca el Pueblo. This was the tomb of a man now known as the Lord of Ucup, or more chillingly, the Decapitator. His burial chamber was a vault of power, but the objects within spoke not of domestic rule or agricultural bounty, but of sanctioned, ritualized violence. He was a priest-king, and his regalia was the uniform for a state-sponsored encounter with death. His body was adorned with the ultimate symbols of March authority. On his head rested a magnificent gold headdress, a towering construction that would have made him appear larger than life. In his ears were massive, intricate ear spools, discs of gold and turquoise that proclaimed his elite status to all who saw him. Around his neck lay a necklace of solid gold peanuts, a potent symbol of fertility and life, a reminder that the power he wielded was intimately connected to the earth's renewal. But the true focus of his office lay beside him. Arrayed around his body were multiple ceremonial knives known as tumis. These were not battlefield weapons. They were objects of profound ritual significance, each blade crafted from gleaming bronze or copper, often with a handle topped by a sculpted figure. The most iconic tumi design features a semicircular blade, and its handle is frequently crowned by the image of a deity, sometimes the Decapitator god himself, a fierce, fanged figure holding a severed head. The presence of these knives in the tomb was not merely symbolic. They were the actual tools of the trade. This lord was almost certainly the high priest who presided over the March's most vital and gruesome state ceremony, the ritual sacrifice. For decades, scholars had studied the vivid, graphic scenes painted on March pottery and murals. They depicted elaborate sequences where warriors, clad in similar regalia, engaged in ritual combat. The loser, stripped of his armor and weapons, was then led to a pyramid. There, a priest, often dressed much like the Lord of Ucup, would cut the victim's throat with a tumi, collecting the blood in a ceremonial cup to be offered to the gods. The final act was often the decapitation of the victim, with the head sometimes displayed or used as a ceremonial object. These scenes were so dramatic, so stylized, that some wondered if they were mythological, depicting the deeds of gods rather than men. The tomb of the Decapitator silenced that debate. Here was the man himself, buried with the very knives used in the ceremony, his body adorned in the exact costume shown in the art. This was direct, material evidence that these bloody performances were real. They were the cornerstone of March cosmology and political control. The ritual was a brutal, sacred cycle. It began with highly formalized battles, likely between warriors from different valleys, which served to select the sacrificial victims. The sacrifice itself was a public spectacle, a demonstration of the priest-king's unique ability to commune with the supernatural. By offering the life force of a strong, captured warrior to the gods, particularly those controlling water and fertility, the Moch believed they ensured the rains would come, the rivers would flow, and the crops would grow. The decapitation was the ultimate act of transformation, turning a powerful enemy into a potent offering. The Lord of Yukyup's tomb reveals the terrifying logic at the heart of this civilization. His golden peanuts symbolized the life he was tasked with fostering. His golden tumis were the instruments required to pay for it. His power derived from his willingness to stand at that precipice, to be the one who negotiated with the gods using the only currency they seemed to demand, the breath and blood of human beings. He was not a monster in a dungeon, but a revered holy man in a headdress of gold, whose most sacred duty was to sever the thread between this world and the next, over and over again, to keep his own world alive. This burial forces a difficult realization that the line between spiritual devotion and state terror can be vanishingly thin, and that a society's most beautiful art can sometimes be a frame for its most brutal truths. The final discovery brings us full circle back to the heart of ancient China, but with a gaze turned not toward armies of clay, but toward the infinite night sky. In 2020, in a suburb of modern Xi'an, archaeologists opened a tomb from the Western Han Dynasty, a burial that had miraculously escaped the notice of looters for over 2,000 years. The occupant was a nobleman, but his most precious possessions were not made of gold or jade. They were words. Stacked carefully around him were thousands of slender bamboo strips, each one neatly bound with silk threads into bundles. This was a complete library buried for one purpose, to serve as a celestial map for the soul's ultimate journey. When experts began the painstaking work of deciphering the faded ink characters, they realized they were reading the oldest and most comprehensive astronomical texts ever found in China. This was the tomb of a star-gazing noble, a scholar official whose passion for the cosmos followed him into the earth. The bamboo strips contained detailed star catalogues, naming and plotting the positions of hundreds of celestial bodies. They recorded precise observations of the planets Venus, Jupiter, Mars, tracking their movements and cycles with meticulous care. There were charts and calculations used for creating calendars, essential for ordering the agricultural and ritual life of the empire. But beyond the dry data, the texts also contained more philosophical and mystical writings, interpretations of celestial omens and their meanings for the state and the individual. This was not a hobby. In Han Dynasty China, astronomy was the highest science, a direct line of communication between the emperor, who was the son of heaven, and the cosmic order. To understand the stars was to understand the mandate of heaven itself, to predict the future, and to maintain harmony between the human world and the universe. By burying this man with his personal archive of the sky, his family was doing something profound. They were ensuring he retained his most critical knowledge. His soul would need to navigate the heavens, to find its place among the constellations, and perhaps to continue his duties of observation and interpretation in the service of the celestial bureaucracy. The tomb was a launch pad, and the bamboo strips were the flight manual. The scientific value of this library is immeasurable. It provides a snapshot of Chinese astronomical knowledge at a precise moment in time, around 2,100 years ago, allowing historians to see exactly what they knew, how they calculated, and how their understanding evolved. It fills gaps in the historical record, confirming some theories and upending others. But on a deeper level, it completes a theme we have seen across all 50 discoveries. From the golden wreaths of Hellenistic victors to the surgical tools of a druid, from the weaving implements of a wary master to the poetic hymns of Enheduanna, these burials reveal that what we choose to take with us is a mirror of what we value most. The stargazer's tomb shows that for some, the ultimate treasure was not wealth or even power, but understanding. His final journey was not into a dark underworld, but into the luminous expanse of the cosmos, guided by his own careful records. In the silent dark of his tomb, he left a legacy of light, a testament to the human urge to look up, to chart the unknown, and to carry that map with us, no matter how far we have to go. From golden masks to glittering crystal maidens, from royal pyramids to the humble grave of a shaman, these 50 astonishing discoveries are far more than a catalogue of tombs. They are a chorus of voices from the deep past, each one singing a verse in the epic of what it means to be human. Every burial site in its silence speaks volumes about life. It reveals the artistry that sought to defy decay, the fears that built traps of mercury and curses, the hopes that packed ships with horses and tombs with board games. It shows us the social structures that elevated some with gold and asked others to follow willingly into the earth, and the beliefs that saw death not as an end, but as a voyage, a transformation, or a sacred negotiation with the unseen forces of the universe. Each skeleton, each artifact is a single puzzle piece, weathered and worn, waiting for our curiosity to fit it back into the vast, unfinished mosaic of our shared story. So we turn the question to you after this journey through the underworld of history, which discovery fascinated or haunted you the most? Was it the serene, tattooed princess of the ice, the terrified scream of a mummified traitor, or the tender, eternal embrace of two lovers in a Neolithic field? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want to keep exploring the mysteries hidden just beneath our feet, be sure to subscribe. The past never truly rests. It waits patient and silent for the next